Chapter 195. Dark night, heavy rain, long street, old house. The continuous heavy rain for many days still showed no signs of stopping. Heavy rain fell from the sky to the ground. The water on the long street had not been cleared, but new rain had begun. The continuous and violent rain covered the whole Dongdu. The gloomy and desolate atmosphere permeated every corner of the city with the dark night and heavy rain. It was cold and depressing, as if the end of the world was coming. The old house was located in the southwest edge of Dongdu, which was infinitely close to Shanghai. Dongdu did not have suburbs in the conventional sense, so even though it was on the edge, it was still prosperous. But prosperity was relative. If this block, this long street, was the poorest place in Dongdu, perhaps even the locals who lived here could not refute it. There were no entertainment places on the long street, and only a few shops were closed early. The roadside street lights flashed gloomily in the heavy rain. The light fell on the ground, and the water kept rippling, flashing bleakly. It was still a scene of tens of thousands of lights, but the scene looked a little desolate. At the end of the long street was darkness. The nearby street lights had been completely damaged because of years of disrepair, and there were some potholes on the road. The old house, which occupied a large area but looked really unflattering, was located here. Under the heavy rain, it was completely dark, completely isolated from the whole world. It seemed that even the sound of the rain falling here was a little smaller. Silently, two pure white figures suddenly appeared at the entrance of the old house. The two figures stood on the left and right sides of the door of the old house, and then they did not move. The darkness obscured their appearances, only revealing the silhouettes of two human figures. Perhaps because the light was too dark, the two white figures that suddenly appeared at the door looked dazzling and strange. Muffled thunder rolled in the sky above. The pale lightning tore the sky in an instant, and the bright arc of light fell from the ninth heaven to the lowest place, completely illuminating everything around the old house for a moment. White clothes, white shoes, and white gloves. Two different but handsome and almost enchanting faces appeared in the darkness, and finally returned to the darkness. It's almost time. Amidst the rumbling of the rain in the darkness, a man in white suddenly spoke. His voice was so soft that it was almost cold, but his soft voice was extremely clear in the heavy rain. It's time. The other man in white said simply. The two fell silent again, motionless. Another bolt of lightning streaked across the sky. In front of the old house, the violent rain, the white people, the dark night, and the dilapidated door were all completely illuminated. In the light and shadow, the whole old house looked like a pure and depressing black and white painting. Bright lights lit up just before the thunder roared. In the rain, a black car drove steadily into the long street, heading towards the dilapidated old house. The two men in white looked at each other. In the darkness, their gazes suddenly focused. The car finally stopped in front of the old house. While the two men in white were still hesitating, the driver in the driver's seat had already jumped out of the car, pulled out the umbrella that was placed in the car door, and jogged to the back of the car. It was an extremely tall white woman. She was nearly 1.9 meters tall and had fair skin. Although her appearance was slightly ordinary, her figure was voluptuous and sexy. She didn't seem to see the two people in white standing at the entrance of the old house at all. She held an umbrella and quickly opened the back door of the car. She covered the roof of the car with the umbrella and waited quietly. Because the umbrella was tilted forward, the rain quickly soaked half of the woman's body, but her expression did not change at all. Her every move was smooth and natural, but revealed a kind of reverence and humility from the bottom of her heart. The two men in white looked at each other again, feeling a little ridiculous. Shadowless Shadow, one of the 12 super masters of samsara. Among all the experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, she was a figure worthy of attention. Shadowless Shadow's strength was speed, and she was good at surprise attacks. Born in snow country, she was tall, but her movements were like a storm, and her momentum was fierce and hard to capture. In the whole dark world, she was a famous figure, and also one of the super masters of samsara with the highest exposure. Before today, the two men in white had never thought that the dignified super master of samsara would act like a servant in the presence of outsiders, and he did it willingly. It was silent in the car. The two men in white watched quietly. Although they had not seen the main character, they felt the arrogance. The arrogance of being high and mighty. A slender and elegant leg was the first to stick out of the car, and the black high heels stepped on the wet ground softly and firmly. The tall woman walked out of the car, stood under the umbrella, and looked around casually. The wind and rain were still the same, and the darkness was still the same. But in an instant, there was suddenly a touch of dreamy light in front of the old house, which was like a black and white picture. She was wearing a black suit, black tights, and black high heels. Her long, smooth hair was casually combed into a ponytail. Her dreamlike, exquisite face was calm and cold, like the clouds and moon in the sky. In the darkness, her whole body seemed to be glowing, with a kind of dazzling and sharp light. Perfect, noble, exquisite, dreamy, proud, cold, different temperaments seemed to have fused together in the most thorough way, completely natural and without the slightest flaw. The eyes of the two men in white, who were no longer young, showed a little trance at the same time. This was the first time they saw this extraordinary woman in the dark world, the extraordinary woman who was regarded as a goddess by countless people. She suddenly appeared in the dark world in an extremely high-profile way. In recent years, behind every event in the dark world, there seemed to be her figure flashing, either in the light or in the dark, with peerless beauty. This light, slightly white, since it appeared, burst out the brightest light in the darkest world. Her beauty was like a poem or jade. This was a woman who should not be in Dongdu at this time, but now she was standing in front of the unknown old house. Qin Weibai. Wait for me in the car. With a cold and soft voice, Qin Weibai took the umbrella from Shadowless and stepped up the steps in front of her. Boss, Shadowless called out subconsciously. The clear sound of high heels on the steps paused. Qin Weibai held the umbrella and chuckled. It's okay. Wait for me. The two men in white at the door had already stepped forward at the same time and said with a smile, Welcome, Boss Qin. His Highness has been waiting for you in the house. Qin Weibai nodded and didn't say anything to them. She held the umbrella and walked into the gate of the old house. In the creaking sound that seemed to show the traces of time, the gate opened and closed. The two men in white still stood there, motionless. In the darkness. In front of Shadowless. Dawn broke. The inside and outside of the old house were basically the same. This was indeed not a luxurious or comfortable place. The mottled walls, uneven ground, and every brick and tile, every blade of grass and tree of the old house exuded a strong ancient aura. Stepping on the flagstone road in the courtyard, Qin Weibai went directly to the living room, the only light on. Although the old house was shabby, it was not small. In the rain, Qin Weibai was the only one walking quietly for dozens of meters. The sound of high heels hitting the flagstone was clear. The deep night, the violent rain, and the old courtyard. The power of time silently shattered the four walls of memory. Under the irresistible general trend, the whole world seemed to have only a predestined destiny. Qin Weibai's eyes were in a trance, and she walked all the way. Through the courtyard, her figure stopped in front of the front hall. Through the stained glass, it seemed that a man was sitting in the room. Qin Weibai took a deep breath. Her somewhat dazed eyes regained focus little by little. They became cold, sharp, and rational. She put away the umbrella. Qin Weibai pushed the door and entered. This was a large front hall. Perhaps the interior decoration was too simple, so it looked very spacious. Lights that were not very bright fell into the hall, leaving large shadows where the light could not reach. On the sofa in the center, a man sat with his back to Qin Weibai, his head bowed. He seemed to be reading a book. There was no picture on the TV, no tea on the coffee table, and no temperature on the air conditioner. The whole front hall was dead silent except for the sound of Qin Weibai opening the door. Qin Weibai calmly clenched her fists and slowly walked into the front hall. The thin high heels hit the ground clearly, ethereal and dreamy. The man sitting on the sofa seemed to hear the sound. He stood up casually, turned his head, and said with a faint smile, "Boss Chin, welcome." This was a very simple man. Simplicity was not all about temperament, but also about appearance. The man looked to be in his 40s. He was not very tall and burly. His figure was slightly ordinary, and his facial features were even more ordinary. But no matter who saw him for the first time, they couldn't say that he was an ordinary person. It was because he was simple. This was an indescribable feeling. He was too quiet and too clear, but every move he made was filled with the charm of the great Tao. He stood up casually and spoke calmly. There was nothing superfluous in his words or actions. But there was a kind of unparalleled power. Simple and peaceful, unfathomable. This was the first time that Qin Weibai couldn't see a person clearly. The other party seemed to put everything in front of her. He had no advantages, but also no weaknesses. The world was like a picture scroll. The other party didn't choose to synchronize himself with the picture scroll, but hid behind the picture scroll, clear and blurry. This was a person. It was a very absurd evaluation. But it was Qin Weibai's most clear feeling. This was a person, the most real person, without disguise, and without self. Qin Weibai frowned slightly and stared at the man in front of her seriously with her watery and dreamy eyes. She seemed to be thinking about something, as if she wanted to see through something. Her approach was so obvious, and there was no concealment. "What are you thinking, Boss Qin?" The man slightly raised his eyebrows. He still had a plain face, but with his movements, his whole person suddenly had a kind of indescribable spirit. It was that every corner of his body was flying with arrogance and fierce momentum, as if he was extremely disdainful of everything in the world and didn't care about it at all. Arrogance. This was the real arrogance. "Weibai greets your highness." Qin Weibai came to her senses, bowed very elegantly, and chuckled softly. "I'm wondering what kind of person your highness is. I've observed you for a long time, but I haven't been able to get the answer." "A long time? Is a minute a long time?" The man smiled disapprovingly, reached out and said, "Sit down. It's been a long time." Qin Weibai said blandly, sat down on the sofa, and asked, "How should I address you, your highness?" "I haven't decided yet." The man thought seriously for a while, and then said self-mockingly, "No one has called me by my name for a long time. It's been many years. Call me Boss Qin." "How should I address you many years ago, your highness?" Qin Weibai sat quietly on the sofa and asked lightly. Her expression was as calm as the misty rain, but there seemed to be needles hidden in her bright eyes, sharp and fierce. "I forgot." The man's tone was indifferent. Qin Weibai took a deep look at him and seemed to lose interest in asking more questions. She went straight to the point and said, "Let's get down to business. The general trend of East Island has been established. Your Highness, what do you think of our cooperation?" "My opinion hasn't changed." The man raised the corner of his mouth and said slowly, "Now we are ready and can act at any time. And I got the news 10 minutes ago that Shinichi Miyamoto has gone to the Imperial Palace of East Island and made a promise to the Mikado. Within 7 days, he will solve everything in Chengdao. Only 7 days. In other words, the final battle has begun." Qin Weibai's eyes, which were as bright as the Milky Way, grew brighter. She nodded thoughtfully. The fact that Shinichi Miyamoto entered the Imperial Palace and made a promise to the Mikado was definitely a top secret. At least not many people were present, and they were all very important figures. But under such circumstances, the Highness in front of her could still get the information, which was enough to show that his power in East Island had reached a terrifying level. Qin Weibai's heart was a little heavy. Was an overly powerful ally really good for the general trend? Maybe. Why me? The man suddenly asked, looking at Qin Weibai, who was deep in thought. Facing the stunning beauty, his eyes were still calm and clear. He didn't even have a little bit of appreciation, let alone amazement. Qin Weibai seemed to be in a trance. Hearing this, she didn't stop and said indifferently, because of your past. Past? I don't have a past. Even if I do, it has nothing to do with me. I am me. The man smiled with interest and said, you seem to know me? It was Samsara who took the initiative to cooperate with us this time. You seem to know the so-called past. Interesting. As I said, there's nothing wrong with our cooperation this time, but it's hard for me to treat Samsara as my friend. I don't believe they will help me for no reason. I seem to have gotten too much from this cooperation. Your Highness, you just need to remember your promise. Qin Weibai said in a soft tone. Protect Li Tianlan? The man couldn't help laughing. I know. He's the current successor of the Li family in Zhongzhou state, right? Do you think he can rebuild the Li family and turn it into a god of war family again? He paused, kept his smile, and said softly, do you think he can? Does he deserve it? When he said this, the man's eyes sparkled with stubbornness. Does he really deserve it? Qin Weibai also smiled. It was a very elegant and calm smile. In this state, Qin Weibai was really devastatingly beautiful. Every frown and smile had a soul-stirring charm. However, with her smile, her eyes became a little cold, as if someone had offended her most beloved thing. No matter who she faced, she had a reason to persist. Tianlan is my man. Qin Weibai looked at the man in front of her and said word by word, Your Highness, do you deserve to judge my man? The atmosphere in the hall suddenly froze. The smile on the man's face disappeared. The man's smile became colder and colder, and finally became expressionless. Qin Weibai remained calm and collected. She just stared at the man without backing down. Her eyes were as sharp as a knife. You're really arrogant. After a long time, the man took a deep breath and said with a cold smile, but you have to remember, this is not Samsara Palace. Your palace master is seriously injured and powerless. At least when you face me, an expert of the invincible realm, you have to maintain the minimum respect. You're not qualified to judge my man. It's a fact. Qin Weibai said blandly, and a mocking smile gradually appeared on her delicate and dreamy face. As for the invincible realm. Your Highness, you have the combat capability of the invincible realm, but are you really in the invincible realm? Are you really invincible like this? The man's eyes suddenly condensed to the extreme, and all the clarity and softness in his eyes disappeared in an instant. The whole old house was filled with thick and cold killing intent. The killing intent surged and gathered. On the sofa, Qin Weibai's face was pale, but she did not move. She still looked at the man in front of her with extreme arrogance. It seems that you know a lot. The endless killing intent suddenly disappeared. The man nodded, narrowed his eyes, and said, if it weren't for I really want to kill you. Qin Weibai was silent. The man stood up from the sofa and took 2 steps before continuing, do you know how much I hate you? Hate? Qin Weibai asked. You know the reason. Since you can appear here, don't tell me you don't know the cause and effect. The man's tone was cold, but there was more or less a trace of helplessness in this cold tone. Qin Weibai seemed to understand something. This time, she smiled sincerely and happily. I can understand. But you're not a fish. How can you know the joy of fish? What's more, this matter is not about whether individuals are wronged or not. At least it's a good thing for the collective. The man was silent. After a long time, he said blandly, my overall situation has nothing to do with the individual or the collective. Hate is hate. Qin Weibai nodded with a smile and softly threatened, if that's the case. Your Highness, I still advise you to change your mind. Otherwise, I may do more things to make you hate in the future. This time, the man did not have killing intent. He just sighed helplessly and bitterly. What on earth do you want? He asked. I've said, I just want Tianlan to be safe. Qin Weibai said softly, the general trend is unpredictable. Your Highness, please. She bent her proud and straight back and bowed deeply to the man in front of her. Respectfully. The man looked at Qin Weibai quietly with a complicated look in his eyes. People like you are a madman, Yi Zichen said. He looked at Qin Weibai and whispered, there's only Li Tianlan in your heart. You don't care about anything. As long as he's fine, you don't care about the halo others give you. You're willing to lower yourself to me for him, but if something happens to him, I can imagine how crazy you'll be for revenge. Am I right? Of course. Qin Weibai smiled softly and said, after all, you promised me. Love to the extreme is madness. The man whispered to himself, his eyes in a trance. If your Highness has never been crazy, how can you empathize with my position? Qin Weibai said calmly, are you unwilling to accept what happened in the past? Regret? Or? No. The man interrupted Qin Weibai and said coldly, Li Tianlan. I'll try my best. Not try your best. Qin Weibai insisted, it's a must. Not to mention how much this cooperation will benefit you, even these years. Your Highness, have you never thought about who you owe the most? Oh. The man suddenly laughed. Obviously, he was no longer young, but once he was arrogant, his whole body was frivolous. Who do I owe? You should ask who owes me the most. Qin Weibai's body shook. Her face, which had been tit for tat with the man, suddenly became pale. There was no trace of blood on it. That was indescribable despair and sadness. Her lips moved, and she slowly lowered her head, which had always been high. At this moment, Qin Weibai's sharpness was gone, leaving only indescribably delicate. I'm sorry. She murmured to herself, her voice faint. What? The man turned his head, looking surprised. Qin Weibai trembled and suddenly came to her senses. She said calmly, it's nothing. Her cold eyes gradually became hot. Finally, it became downright crazy. Protect Tianlan. She looked at the man in front of her and said word by word, you must do it. If something happens to him, the person who killed him will die. Your Highness, you will die too. The man wanted to retort, but when he saw the madness in Qin Weibai's eyes, he couldn't help but sigh and nod. This plan has already affected the overall situation. The Dark Knights, Knights Templars, the Heroes Club, the Polar Ground Alliance, the Wang family of Beihai. So many superpowers are involved. Zhongzhou State has angered several superpowers in the Dark World, but after this plan, you will also anger Zhongzhou State. Boss Qin, is it worth it? You should know what the consequences will be. Qin Weibai looked at him calmly and said blandly, Zhongzhou State has already become a power. Although it's weak now, Kunlun City can't do whatever it wants. When Tianlan returns to Zhongzhou State, it doesn't matter if I'm there or not. The man's heart trembled for no reason, and he shook his head silently. Until now, she was still thinking about Li Tianlan. As for herself, when did she ever think about it? She would completely devote her life, faith, and even her soul to a man. She would rather be smashed to pieces and be the enemy of the whole world. How terrifying was this madness? I'll leave for Changdao immediately. The man nodded, and his tone was firm. I'll go to Changdao too. Qin Weibai nodded. Are you going to see Li Tianlan? The man asked with a smile. Qin Weibai shook her head and said softly, it's better not to see him. The man took a deep look at Qin Weibai, feeling the determination in those 4 words. For the first time, there was real respect in his eyes. Besides money and power, force and wisdom could change history. But there was also madness. The man chuckled and said in a sincere tone, none of us know which will come first, tomorrow or an accident. The world is like a storm, and people are like candlelight under the rain. They can be extinguished at any time, because we never know what will happen in the next second. But I can promise you that this time, I'll try my best to protect Li Tianlan. That's my respect for your persistence. Thank you. Qin Weibai nodded, turned around, and walked out of the door without hesitation. When she was about to go out, she suddenly stopped. With her back to the man behind her, she said blandly, "If the world is really a storm, when you go out in the storm, you will die a good death." The man behind her laughed wildly, unruly, and indifferent. Outside the window, the rain was heavy. End of Volume 2. Chapter 196. Changdao looked calmer and calmer. The currency war ravaged the entire East Island. Everyone's attention seemed to be attracted by the sudden outbreak of the war. Most of the blood and chaos were taken away by this war with no smoke and blood. The few remnants were drowned in the continuous storm in Changdao. East Island was in chaos. Changdao was dead silent. The commotion caused by the superpowers entering Changdao had subsided. All the superpowers were quietly lurking, holding back, waiting for the right time to trigger the final battle. East Island had the home advantage and could start the final battle at any time. But the dark superpowers entering Changdao at this moment were not ordinary. As long as there was a chance, every superpower was qualified to start the final battle. The elites of the fire-flaming realm. The superiors of the thunder-shocking realm. The half-step invincible realm, even the invincible realm. And the famous murderous weapons of the dark world were all here. As time went by, the seemingly calm Changdao was actually getting more and more dangerous. It was like an explosive whose fuse had been ignited. The next second, the next minute, it could explode completely. Li Tianlan was waiting. The general trend was out of his control. All he could do was wait and see. But the process of waiting and seeing wasn't boring. In the last leisure time when the general trend seemed to be far away but was getting closer, Li Tianlan suddenly found that he could actually do a lot of things. Or even too many. The most important thing right now was to improve his strength. It was already the middle of July. Li Tianlan, who had too much vitality to squander, had basically recovered from his injury. It wasn't a blessing in disguise, but it was an indisputable fact that his strength had improved. During the battle in Zhongjing, under the pressure of Heavenly Calamity's death threat, Li Tianlan fell into an unprecedented state of fury. It could be said that by coincidence, his strength broke through again. And it was a double breakthrough. His real realm re-entered the stabilization phase of the ice-condensing realm. Within the effective range of the surge potion, his realm had reached the stabilization phase of the fire-flaming realm. After the completion of the chi-controlling realm, he went further, especially the shadow formula, and the third shadow had reached the basic level. These days, he spent a lot of time meditating every year, adapting to the strange and familiar power in his body, and studying his own unique skills. The 24 moves of sword, night walking, Buddhist incantation of 9 words, desperate chase, and even the 2 unique skills of the Wang family of Beihai were recorded in the map of God of War. Li Tianlan now had too many unique skills. In addition, his chi-controlling realm had surpassed the so-called completion and flawless. How to integrate these strange unique skills and realms into one and turn them into his own combat capability had become Li Tianlan's primary problem. Not only in East Island, but also in East Island. He didn't know when it started, but the second before his life ended, every time his strength improved, he would have a higher chance of survival. Survival. Grudges, the general trend, the past, and only survival kept moving forward in his heart until it occupied the most important position. An unprecedented sense of urgency occupied his heart. It was almost instinctive. Li Tianlan longed for all ways to become stronger. He didn't know why, but it was just a feeling. This feeling was called fear. It wasn't because of the fear of exposing his identity, but a vague intuition that seemed clear but also extremely vague. Li Tianlan didn't know what he was afraid of. He couldn't even tell exactly when this feeling began to exist. But the general trend was moving forward, the storm was getting more and more turbulent, and the feeling in his heart was getting more and more obvious. It was another deep night. In the rumbling sound of the wind and rain, Li Tianlan slowly opened his eyes from the deepest meditation. His eyes were solemn and calm. There was a faint light in the extremely luxuriously decorated room. His eyes took in everything in the room, and finally stopped on the beautiful figure in front of him. There was a bamboo rattan chair in the room. Dongqing Rushi sat quietly on the chair with her head down, playing with Li Tianlan's human emperor with interest. Her long black hair fell down like a waterfall, intentionally or unintentionally covering a small part of her face. The girl's face was beautiful, and her eyes were clear. Her every move was picturesque. Rushi? Li Tianlan called tentatively. Dongqing Rushi woke up about a week ago, and then she naturally lived in this villa. Her room was next to Li Tianlan's. She followed Li Tianlan most of the time except for resting. Beside Li Tianlan, she was really a girl without any sharpness or arrogance. She just followed Li Tianlan quietly and rarely took the initiative to speak, but she didn't refuse to chat with him. She accompanied him to meditate, eat with him, and meet with guests with him. This kind of relationship, which was forced together by engagement, was subtle and weird. But maybe because Dongqing Rushi was too quiet, Li Tianlan didn't feel embarrassed. So these days, although the two of them were not really attached to each other, in a sense, they were really a couple, and rarely separated. At the beginning, Li Tianlan had tactfully said once that he wanted Dongqing Rushi to do her own thing. After all, the two of them were inseparable. Although it seemed natural, it was extremely strange in the eyes of others. Even Dongqing Rushi herself couldn't say that she loved him deeply. She was just trying very hard to maintain the identity of a fiancé and do what a fiancé should do. Li Tianlan still couldn't imagine what the identity of fiancé meant to Dongqing Rushi. But before he figured out how to deal with the relationship with Dongqing Rushi, this kind of intimacy, or superficial intimacy, was obviously not an appropriate approach. So Li Tianlan thought it was very appropriate to separate from Dongqing Rushi, at least for the time being. Dongqing Rushi didn't say anything. She just blinked her big clear eyes and looked at Li Tianlan for a while, then nodded and left. But in less than 5 minutes, she appeared in front of Li Tianlan again. It was Dongqing Yueshan. Dongqing Yueshan was much colder, sharper, and more arrogant than Dongqing Rushi. Since then, Li Tianlan refused to say anything more and let Dongqing Rushi follow him. Although it hadn't been a long time, in a sense, he found that he had gotten used to this kind of quiet following. Ah. Dongqing Rushi responded. She raised her head subconsciously and said seriously, "You haven't talked to me for a long time." "I was meditating." Li Tianlan smiled and looked at the time. He had meditated for more than 6 hours, and it was almost midnight. "I know." Dongqing Rushi nodded and continued to look down at the human emperor in her hand. For her, she could carry the human emperor that weighed more than 50 kilograms, but it was not easy to use it easily. After playing with it for a while, her hands were a little sore. "Are you tired?" Li Tianlan took the human emperor and looked at Dongqing Rushi. The soft light, the beautiful girl, and the silver edge. Coming back to his senses from the silent meditation world, he clearly sensed this world, and the feeling in his heart seemed to begin to surge violently again. "I'm fine. Do you want to eat something?" Dongqing Rushi shook her head. Compared with Li Tianlan and even Li Beidian, Dongqing Rushi's meditation time was the shortest. She didn't even need to meditate. Her second personality, Dongqing Yueshan, was too weird, and the form it showed was extremely strong, even not weaker than the first personality's autonomy and independence. In this case, when the first personality was fighting or relaxing, the second personality could have enough time to meditate. Moreover, although all Dongqing Rushi's martial arts were inherited from Jade Pool, the core was on the Silent Sword. The sword intent on the Silent Sword was Dongqing Rushi's martial arts. When others were still struggling in the 4 realms of martial arts and trying their best to find a breakthrough, Dongqing Rushi just needed to feel the sword intent of the Silent Sword. To put it bluntly, others, including Li Tianlan, were all practicing unique skills while improving their realms. Dongqing Rushi only needed to practice unique skills with the help of the Silent Sword, and her realm would improve accordingly. The Heavenly Flying Fairy Sword. The Peerless Myriad Sword. This was everything Dongqing Rushi had in martial arts. When these two sword intents reached the extreme and merged with silence, Dongqing Rushi could step into the invincible realm. The Great Way was the simplest. This could be said to be a shortcut, and the key to Dongqing Rushi reaching the peak of the fire-flaming realm at the age of 19. Although this method was rare, it was not unparalleled in the world. The Li family also had a similar unique skill path. The most important thing for such a path was to have a suitable carrier. The carrier of Jade Pool was the sword intent in the silent sword, and the carrier of the Li family was unique skills. If Li Tianlan only wanted to pursue the invincible realm, he didn't need to practice the complete 24 moves of sword. He only needed to practice the 15th blade of reincarnation, and then he would have a chance to enter the invincible realm. However, although this path was a shortcut, it was also very difficult. Even if he succeeded, the upper limit was too low, which was not in line with Li Tianlan's pursuit. Dongqing Rushi could take this path, except that she was a girl, and the only possibility was that her compatibility with the silent sword was almost perfect. Thinking of what Dongqing Yueshan said, Li Tianlan took a deep look at Dongqing Rushi, and his heart was full of mixed feelings. "I'm not eating. I'm not hungry." He shook his head and said softly. The vague sense of oppression and fear in his heart existed almost all the time, and it was getting clearer and clearer. Li Tianlan was not in the mood to think about other things at all. After meditation, he had planned to continue studying the Buddhist incantation of 9 words of tribulation. He was destined to be sleepless tonight. "You're in a bad mood." Dongqing Rushi stood in front of Li Tianlan and said flatly. It was not a question, but an affirmation. Under the soft light, she stared at Li Tianlan quietly. Her eyes were clear, as if they were not stained by the magazines and dust of the mortal world. That was a very quiet power. In the past many years, had she been like this, staying on the peak of Tian Shan, growing and blossoming quietly and quietly? Was she lonely? Was she bitter? Was she lost? Dongqing Rushi, Dongqing Yueshan. What kind of power was surging behind the indifference and tranquility? Li Tianlan smiled slightly. At least at this moment, in front of Dongqing Rushi, he had let down his guard. "I'm scared." He looked into Dongqing Rushi's eyes and said calmly. "What are you afraid of?" Dongqing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan in confusion. But what she got was only silence. Li Tianlan thought about it seriously. He didn't know what he was afraid of. It was just a vague feeling, or intuition, that was getting clearer and clearer. It seemed to be, losing. Losing? Li Tianlan murmured to himself and said softly, "You're afraid of losing, aren't you?" Dongqing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan quietly. She was extremely tall, so she could see Li Tianlan's eyes without deliberately looking up. At this moment, Li Tianlan said he was afraid, but there was no fear or retreat in his eyes. Dongqing Rushi only saw firmness, and the hidden wildness behind the firmness that could shake everything. Her clear eyes fluctuated slightly, like ripples on the water, spreading layer by layer. In the silence, Dongqing Rushi reached out and gently pulled Li Tianlan's palm, saying in a clear voice, "Don't be afraid. I'll be with you." Li Tianlan felt warm inside, but before he said anything, Dongqing Rushi continued, "The Dongqing clan will be with you too. When you were meditating, Grandpa called me. He said that things in East Island should be solved soon, at least there will be a result. Then he will ask us to go back to Zhongyuan and celebrate our birthdays." The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth moved. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't say anything. He knew very well what the invitation of the Dongqing clan meant at this time. When his identity was no longer a secret, when he had caused the hostility of Kunlun City and even the Wang family of Beihai and countless people, the Dongqing clan's statement meant support. And it was full support without any concealment. Li Tianlan had been carefully guarding against the kindness and possible malice of the Dongqing clan. But as the Dongqing clan went to the opposite side of Kunlun City, all the doubts in his heart suddenly disappeared. Li Tianlan was excited and took a deep breath. "Thank the old master for me." He was still worried, but he also knew very well that he couldn't refuse such help, and he had no right to refuse it. "You're welcome." Dongqing Rushi was still indifferent, but her eyes lit up slightly. "Grandpa said it's just a good time to save a cake." "Well," she nodded, made a gesture and said, "I want a big cake this time." Li Tianlan was a little lost in thought. He finally realized that something seemed to be wrong, so he said subconsciously, "Save a cake." "Yes." Dongqing Rushi said softly, "Our birthdays are the same. The same month and the same day." Li Tianlan froze. They were born on the same month and the same day. This sentence was like a breeze, directly blowing into the depths of Li Tianlan's heart. In an instant, fate seemed to be close at hand. Dongqing Rushi pulled Li Tianlan to sit on the bed and said softly, "Why are you afraid?" "To be exact, it's a sense of urgency." Li Tianlan shook his head. "I always feel that something is going to happen. If I don't have enough strength, I'm likely to lose something." "When did it start?" Dongqing Rushi seemed to chuckle. "It can't be intuition, can it? Prophecy?" Li Tianlan was also smiling, but his smile was bitter. Countless images seemed to squeeze into his mind at the same time. When did it start? From the moment he saw Gong Sun Chi? Or, from the moment he and Saint faced the murderous weapon? Or was it when the Duke handed him the list? Memories kept rolling, and all kinds of images appeared in his mind. They kept rolling, passing through the heavy rain in East Island, the Sky Academy, and finally stopped in the strange and hurried crowd. All the images suddenly disappeared. There was only a pair of eyes with faint coldness and coldness in front of Li Tianlan. They were dreamlike, perfect and flawless. Li Tianlan's face was livid, and he suddenly stood up. The pair of dreamy eyes became clearer and clearer, and the fear in his heart instantly reached the extreme. Until this moment, he realized that he hadn't heard from Qin Weibai for a long time. Li Tianlan took out his cell phone with trembling hands and dialed Qin Weibai's number immediately. No one answered. Li Tianlan didn't give up and started to send videos again. There was also no response. Li Tianlan's livid face began to turn pale. For many days, with Saint, Duke, Horsewoman, and the flaming fire supermasters around him, he began to instinctively feel that Qin Weibai was also extremely safe in Zhongzhou State. But it was not until this moment that he realized that they hadn't contacted each other for many days, which was a strange phenomenon. How was Qin Weibai now? Li Tianlan's livid face turned pale. He took the cell phone and sent a voice message word by word, "Answer my call, right now." There was no response. Li Tianlan managed to wait for 5 minutes. The atmosphere in the whole room gradually became oppressive and violent. Just when he was about to stand up and go to Duke, the long-lost video ringtone finally rang. Li Tianlan breathed a sigh of relief and answered the video call without hesitation. The delicate face that seemed to have been missed day and night and ignored for a long time appeared in front of Li Tianlan in the video call. Qin Weibai was wearing a white bathrobe and was wiping her hair with a towel. "I was taking a shower just now," she said softly. "Your tone is very strange. Are you angry with me?" "No." All the anxiety and fear in Li Tianlan's heart suddenly disappeared, leaving only complete peace. He scratched his head and said softly, "I just miss you." Qin Weibai's beautiful red lips gently raised, and her eyes were bright. Her whole body released a kind of almost suffocating charm. "Me too," she said softly. "I miss you very, very much." Li Tianlan gave a silly laugh and said, "Where are you? Why haven't you contacted me for so long?" Qin Weibai's expression slightly froze, and she said in a low voice, "I'm still in the Sky Academy." "Well, there are a lot of things going on recently, and your side is more complicated. You must be very busy these days, right?" "Actually, there's nothing to be busy about." Li Tianlan's heart became more and more relaxed. It seems that things have stabilized for now. Stability is only temporary. Qin Weibai said, "You have to be careful in East Island. Tianlan, the situation will change soon." I've received the news that Shinichi Miyamoto personally met the Mikado and promised to solve all the disputes in Chengdao within 7 days. In 7 days, no matter what, there will be a clear result. 7 days. Li Tianlan's eyes slightly narrowed, and he slowly said, "How many days is this?" "The first day." Qin Weibai calmly said. Li Tianlan nodded. Now everyone knew that the final battle was near, but no one knew that the final battle was so close. Li Tianlan suddenly thought of a possibility that he had guessed for a long time, and he couldn't help but say, "Weibai, how much do you know about the mysterious force in East Island?" I know a lot, but also very little. For now, they are our partners, and that's basically it. Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan's face seriously, as if she wanted to engrave every expression on his face into the depths of her soul. "Honey, no matter what I do, I won't hurt you." "Do you trust me?" she said. Almost instinctively, Li Tianlan nodded and said without hesitation, "I believe you." Qin Weibai's eyes were brighter, with undisguised happiness and satisfaction. "The storm is about to pass, and you can leave East Island soon," she said with a smile. "Wait for me to go back." Li Tianlan nodded, and then he suddenly raised his eyebrows and said, "Before I left, I remember you said that you would give me a reward when I go back. Does that still count? What reward do you want?" Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan with her charming eyes, and every move she made was the charm and style of a little woman. She was beautiful, and her grace was unparalleled. "Get married and have children?" Li Tianlan said jokingly. Qin Weibai's face changed slightly, and her charming smile became a little stiff, and there seemed to be a trace of inexplicable fear in her eyes. Before Li Tianlan noticed her abnormality, she forced a smile and said, "You are still young." Li Tianlan, who had been in a good mood, laughed and said nothing. Dongqing Rushi, who had been silent, seemed to be unwilling to be ignored. She hesitated for a moment, and then her beautiful face finally came over. Looking at the beautiful woman on the screen, she opened her small mouth slightly, as if she was a little surprised, but there was no jealousy in her clear eyes, only the most simple curiosity. Qin Weibai was also stunned, and she glanced at Li Tianlan with a faint smile. Li Tianlan coughed, and when he was about to say something, Qin Weibai looked at Dongqing Rushi and said, "Hello, I'm Qin Weibai." "I'm Dongqing Rushi." Dongqing Rushi also came to her senses and said quietly. After greeting each other, they didn't say anything more. Qin Weibai put the towel in her hand aside, looked at Li Tianlan and said softly, "I'll hang up first." Li Tianlan nodded and said yes. Qin Weibai held the phone. The second before she hung up, she took a deep look at Dongqing Rushi. Her eyes were complicated, and she seemed to be sorry. She told Li Tianlan that she was still in the Sky Academy, but she was actually in Chengdao now. This was a hotel that was not too luxurious. And it was less than 5 kilometers away from the club where Li Tianlan was. As the screen of the phone gradually dimmed, Qin Weibai, who was wearing a snow-white bathrobe, got up gently and walked to the French window. She was in a different place from Li Tianlan, enjoying the same storm under the same sky. The distance of 5 kilometers wasn't far, but she stopped here. She didn't dare to see Li Tianlan, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't dare to. Just like what she said to the mysterious highness in Dongdu a few hours ago. It was better not to see him. The sky outside the window was as dark as ink, and the storm was still heavy. Qin Weibai, who was as perfect as a dream, stood quietly in front of the window, enjoying the wind and rain in the night. She smiled gently, but her eyes were sad and lonely. She looked down at Li Tianlan on the phone screen and whispered to herself. "Your final sky, I'm not there." The wind and rain cut through the darkness and fell on the ground, splashing water. Chapter 197. The long night was coming to an end. When the darkness dissipated and the bright morning light shone through the window, Li Tianlan, who had been in the same position all night, finally moved his body. It seemed that he hadn't moved for a long time. As he moved, the sound of his joints vibrating came from his body. In the clear sound, he began to concentrate completely. His eyes were a little sore because he stayed up all night. He turned off the lamp in front of him, shook his head hard, and looked out of the window. The pale golden morning light shone through the window. The soft light shone into the bedroom. The sky was high and the clouds were light. The sun was rising. Outside the French window, the trees and flowers were all bathing in the long-lost sunshine on such an early morning. Li Tianlan slightly narrowed his swollen eyes and came to the window. He looked at the sunshine outside the window with no expression. The rainstorm that swept through the whole East Island had stopped. Outside the window, there were crystal drops of water hanging on the treetops, shining with a subtle and soft light in the sunshine. The first day of the 7-day period passed quietly in the bright and rare sunshine. Wind, rain, and sunshine. The natural environment was alternating. But the depression in Li Tianlan's heart never decreased. Meditation had almost replaced his sleep. He was busiest when he had nothing to do. The unique techniques of Zhuanyuantai, tribulation, and even the Wang family of Beihai were running in his mind all the time. Li Tianlan had never had this kind of mentality before. This kind of desire, even the crazy mentality of wanting to become stronger. The mentality of survival and becoming stronger had been messed up. Li Tianlan couldn't be sure whether he wanted to become stronger because he wanted to survive or to survive because he wanted to be stronger. He didn't bother to think about it. There was not much conflict between the two. He was still alive, so he would try his best to become stronger. That was all. The morning sun rose slowly in the cool morning wind. The light covered the earth and shone on every corner. Li Tianlan didn't move, letting the sun cover him. In the morning light, his whole body seemed to be emitting a pale golden brilliance. In the blurry light and shadow, there was a calm and determined face. Dongqing Rushi had already sat up from the bed. She blinked her sleepy eyes and stared at Li Tianlan's back. She didn't leave last night, nor did she do anything intimate with Li Tianlan. When Li Tianlan was studying unique skills, she slept on Li Tianlan's bed. The simplest companionship was also the most silent and gentle. No one could know how perfectly Tianlan had been instilled in Dongqing Rushi's mind since she was a child. He was everywhere, and as the two of them got closer, the vague impression seemed to become clearer and clearer. Dongqing Rushi's two personalities couldn't be sure if this was love, but even if it had nothing to do with love, playing the role of a fiancé was definitely what she wanted to do most now. She moved her body on the bed, and the confusion in her eyes gradually disappeared. She gradually became clear-headed and cold. Haste makes waste, you've heard of this saying, right? I don't object to you risking your life, but proper rest is still necessary. Otherwise, it will only have the opposite effect. She looked at Li Tianlan's back shrouded in light and said in a flat tone. He didn't need to ask which personality of Dongqing Rushi this tone belonged to. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly and was not surprised. He said calmly, I've already rested. 2 hours of sleep a day? Or nearly 10 hours of meditation? If you think that this so-called rest can help you, then forget about what I said. Dongqing Yueshan's tone was a little cold. Li Tianlan frowned and said nothing. So far, he had seen Dongqing Yueshan 3 times. But each time they talked, they parted on bad terms. Li Tianlan didn't hate Dongqing Yueshan's personality, but it was hard for him to like her. Generally speaking, she seemed to be born with a bad temper. What on earth are you worried about? Dongqing Yueshan sighed softly, got out of bed and walked to Li Tianlan. Samsara. Li Tianlan didn't hesitate this time. He seemed to have an answer in his heart. In the morning light, he took out a cigarette and lit it. He took a deep breath and suddenly said, Does the Dongqing clan have any information about Samsara's action this time? Dongqing Yueshan froze for a moment. Li Tianlan continued, This time Zhongzhou State is plotting against East Island. Samsara is fully cooperating, but it can't be voluntary help, right? What does Samsara want? Do you have any information about this? Dongqing Yueshan thought about it and shook her head. No. You should know that our family can't care about this now. In our family, except for you and me, only my godfather is in Changdao. The others are in Zhongzhou State. The Battle of Changdao is not the focus of our family. Our family. Dongqing Yueshan said this word naturally, almost instinctively. Li Tianlan took a deep look at her and said nothing. Right now, the main focus of the Dongqing clan was not on Changdao. Even Jade Pool didn't make much effort in this nation-toppling plot. When countless forces of Zhongzhou State began to expand outward, someone in the rear had to pay attention to the defense. Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre of Zhongzhou State, was flying around the camps of the Border Control Corps almost every day. He had no time to care about Changdao and Samsara. Right now, Zhongzhou State wasn't peaceful either. A large number of East Island experts were trapped in Huading, including several experts of the Invincible Realm. The whole of Huading could become the fourth battlefield besides Changdao, North America, and Northern Europe at any time. Similarly, the famous Border Control Corps of Zhongzhou State was also an obvious target. The Dark World was a world full of cruelty, blood, and violence. But behind a series of negative words, it also meant that this was an absolutely rational world, especially when the superpowers rarely fought against each other. In the current situation, the special warfare system of East Island was in danger, and it was inevitable that Zhongzhou State would benefit. So it was time to pay attention to balance. If East Island was driven to desperation, it might let the experts trapped in Huading break out of the encirclement and turn Huading into a new battlefield. But if there were no great benefits, how could other forces cooperate willingly? They paid attention to balance. Since the rise of the Snowdance Corps was inevitable, it was acceptable to inflict a heavy blow on the Border Control Corps and let the Snowdance Corps grow. The Border Control Corps was famous, and all of them were elites. But it was much easier to attack them at the border than to sneak into an away battlefield. Everyone understood this. Now all the eyes of the Dongqing clan and Jade Pool were focused on the defense of Zhongzhou State. To put it bluntly, they didn't care about anything here in Changdao at all. Don't worry. Her Highness of Samsara defeated Gu Xingyun and is in the limelight. Who will have the time to mess with her? She'll be fine. Dongqing Yueshan said slowly. Li Tianlan nodded and then shook his head. He said with gloomy eyes, I'm worried about her after the battle with Gu Xingyun. Dongqing Yueshan didn't know what to say about this. In recent months, the most glamorous person in the whole dark world was undoubtedly the mysterious master of Samsara Palace. She killed Night Spirit, entered Mount Dibbing, fought Gu Xingyun, and plotted against Zhongzhou State. She was a woman, but she had a kind of powerful spirit. Her every move had a kind of unparalleled divine power. But all of this happened too frequently. Li Tianlan wasn't the only one who was worried about the state of the master of Samsara Palace at the moment. Most people were not optimistic about her current state. What do you want to eat? I'll do it. Dongqing Yueshan was silent for a while, then she simply changed the topic and asked. The Dongqing clan had always been very clear about the cultivation of Dongqing Rushi. First of all, she was the fiancée of the Li family, and second, she was a genius of martial arts. Under this cultivation mode, Dongqing Rushi's cooking skills were needless to say. A breakfast was no problem for Dongqing Rushi's two personalities. No. Li Tianlan shook his head, turned around, and said, I don't have an appetite. I'm going out for a walk. Dongqing Yueshan said faintly, Oh, I'll accompany you. I can take a breath of fresh air. You? Li Tianlan looked at Dongqing Yueshan with a strange look. Dongqing Yueshan, whose personality was sharp and almost fierce, snorted coldly and said directly, Do you have a problem with that? Shouldn't you go back? Li Tianlan said euphemistically. It was easier for him to accept the main personality of Dongqing Rushi. She was peaceful, pure, beautiful, and noble without any blemish. I'm not going back. Dongqing Yueshan shook her head, glanced at Li Tianlan, and said with a faint smile, "If you want to see her, tomorrow." Li Tianlan paused, looked at Dongqing Yueshan thoughtfully, and suddenly said, "Rushi really doesn't know about your existence?" "For the time being, yes," Dongqing Yueshan said faintly. "But if you accompany me today, when she shows up tomorrow, who can explain to her what happened today?" Li Tianlan squinted and asked, "We only have 7 days. Now is the first day. I have my ways," Dongqing Yueshan said faintly, and went straight into the bathroom to wash up. Li Tianlan stood where he was, and his eyes became deeper and deeper. Until this moment, he vaguely realized that Dongqing Rushi did have a split personality, but the Dongqing Yueshan in front of him was no longer the sub-personality of Dongqing Rushi. She had a dual personality, 2 completely independent consciousnesses. In this sense, when Dongqing Yueshan appeared, she was Dongqing Yueshan, and Dongqing Rushi was already in a deep sleep. Even if Li Tianlan was not an expert in this field, he knew how rare it was to have 2 almost independent consciousnesses in one body. But before he decided whether to study it or not, there was a knock on the door. Li Baitian's voice came from outside the door, "Tianlan, are you up?" Li Tianlan was stunned. He answered and walked over to open the door. Although the people of East Emperor Palace had lived in the same villa for many days, they didn't have much time to see each other. Under the pressure of the general trend, everyone was trying their best to improve their strength. Even if they met each other after meditation, they would be busy with their own things after a few words. Li Tianlan couldn't remember how long he hadn't seen Li Badian. At this time, when he heard his voice, he had a strange feeling. Li Badian, who was dressed in a neat suit, was standing in front of the door and tidying up his clothes. Seeing Li Tianlan come out, he casually said, "Hello, morning." "Morning." Li Tianlan nodded. Looking at Li Badian, who was dressed so formally, he smiled unexpectedly and said, "Dressed like this, are you going on a date?" "It's stupid to dress like this for a date. Damn it, this shit is suffocating me." Li Badian pulled the tie on his collar and said with a wry smile, "There's a meeting today. I'm here to say hello to you. All the superpowers are going to attend. You should also get ready. I guess someone will come to pick you up soon." He paused, shook his head, and said with a slightly complicated tone, "I really want to go with you." "Now, hey, it's okay." Li Tianlan shook his head with a smile and said, "There will always be a chance in the future." Although Li Badian didn't say it explicitly, Li Tianlan knew what the so-called meeting was. The final battle was about to break out. Zhongzhou State really needed a meeting with enough weight to coordinate all aspects. Now there were nearly 2,000 elites of Zhongzhou State in Changdao, but only a few were qualified to attend this meeting. Those who could step into the meeting were all powerful, influential, or influential figures. Li Tianlan's East Emperor Palace had just been established. As a department-level agency, its starting point was definitely not low. But such an agency was a piece of cake in the eyes of the big shots. Institutions of this level, to put it bluntly, were no different from cannon fodder in the Battle of Changdao. The reason why Li Badian could attend this meeting was not because of East Emperor Palace, but because of Mount Shu. Mount Shu's Great Void Sword Master. This identity was much more important. Especially in the current situation. Different from Jade Pool, which focused on defense and Dongqing clan's advance and retreat, Mount Shu was arguably one of the most active transcendental forces in Zhongzhou State's plot. Swords scattered in the southwest. In the past 2 months, the personnel of the special warfare system in the southwest of Zhongzhou State had changed frequently. A considerable part of the leaders of the Special Warfare Agency were replaced by swordsmen from Mount Shu. From the southwest border to the southwest inland, the brilliant sword intent of Mount Shu was shining everywhere. Mount Shu's Phantom Sword Master went to the southwest border. Yin and Yang Sword Master Han Chongyang went to Changdao in person. Mount Shu never lacked resources. Once their thousands of sword intents broke out, in a short time, both their influence and strength were expanding rapidly. Nowadays, Mount Shu had become a force that couldn't be ignored, whether it was the defense of the southwest of Zhongzhou State or the Battle of Changdao. If Yin and Yang's sword master Han Chongyang didn't come, it would be fine. But with Yin and Yang's sword master Han Chongyang here, no matter how young Li Beidian, the great void sword master, was, no one dared to ignore him. Li Beidian would attend the upcoming meeting as the great void sword master of Mount Shu, and Li Tianlan would probably attend the meeting as the Samsara Palace. As for the East Emperor Palace, before it grew up, it was a complete joke in the eyes of the big shots. Change your clothes. Li Beidian shook his head. Today, all the big shots of the domestic special warfare system are here. We can't lose. I just got a call. I guess people from Samsara will come to pick you up soon. Li Tianlan nodded. Before he said anything, Dongqing Yueshan, who had finished washing, walked out of the bathroom. She asked casually, "Where are you going?" "There's a meeting later." "I guess I have to go, too." Li Tianlan answered casually as well. There were two groups of elites that Zhongzhou State sent to East Island. The first group was relatively simple. Most of them were elites of the Special Warfare System or freshmen of the Special Warfare Academy. But the second group was completely different. There were many extraordinary figures in it. Although the second group was only about 600 people, the weakest one was an elite in the fire-flaming realm. Some transcendental or neutral forces like the Terracotta Army, Mount Shu, Azura Path, Sai City, and Kunlun City also gathered together. This was an extremely powerful force, but it also contained complicated and entangled grievances. It was really hard to say what the meeting would be like. "I'll go with you." Dongqing Yueshan said, "Oh." This was also where she was different from Dongqing Rushi. She was direct and almost domineering. This sentence from her mouth was not so much a discussion as a notification. Li Tianlan nodded subconsciously. His mind was not on this at all. The two naturally asked and answered, but Li Beidian, who was beside them, gradually became dull. Dongqing Rushi's fiancé was Li Tianlan. Before this, even Ning Qianqing did not know this news. Now it was no longer a secret, but Li Beidian did not expect that the two would develop so fast. How long had it been? Did the second miss of the Dongqing clan sleep with Tianlan? Fuck, the couple in the name of fiancé and fiancée was really unscrupulous and domineering. Li Beidian's eyes flickered. He inadvertently caught a glimpse of a faint white at the corner of Dongqing Yueshan's mouth. The white was so small and faint that it could not be seen clearly. But the more he looked at it, the more suspicious he felt. The corner of Li Beidian's mouth twitched slightly. Looking at Li Tianlan, who still looked calm, he really wanted to beat this bastard to death for indulging in sex so early in the morning. "I'll go pick out some clothes for you." After saying this, Dongqing Yueshan wiped the remaining toothpaste foam at the corner of her mouth and turned to leave. Li Beidian's expression was strange and he was speechless for a moment. "What's wrong?" Another voice abruptly rang out. Ning Qianqing's figure walked out of the bedroom not far away and looked at Li Beidian. "I'm worshipping my idol. Look at my expression, don't I look very pious?" Li Beidian looked at Ning Qianqing and said. Ning Qianqing seemed to be in a very bad mood and his face was a little gloomy. He frowned inexplicably and looked puzzled. "Look, it's this one. Come and take a look." Li Beidian looked at Li Tianlan with an exaggerated expression. "The strongest holy knight of the century has appeared. Brother, aren't you going to worship him?" "What nonsense are you talking about?" Li Tianlan and Ning Qianqing said in unison. "Goddess Qin, Dongqing Rushi, Wang Yuetong. TSK, who can ride a goddess if not a holy knight? Tianlan, you're good. I felt sorry for you because Goddess Qin appeared by your side, but it turns out that you're the pickiest and want the best of everything. I've seen a dragon knight in Master Jin's martial arts novel, but I didn't expect to become a brother with a holy knight. I'd feel sorry for myself if I didn't worship him." "Fuck you." Li Tianlan scolded with a smile and pretended to rush forward to kick him. Li Badian laughed and disappeared in a flash. I'll go down and have a look. You guys talk. Li Tianlan shook his head helplessly and looked at the silent Ning Qianqing. What's wrong? Why do you look so bad so early in the morning? Nothing serious. Ning Qianqing shook his head and said, there's a meeting in a while. Did Badian tell you about it? Li Tianlan grunted and then felt something was wrong. He looked up at Ning Qianqing and said, you're going to attend? What's your identity? Li Badian was the great void sword master of Mount Shu. It was understandable that he would attend the meeting. As for Li Tianlan himself, several super masters of samsara were around him because of his relationship with Qin Weibai. He had to attend as well. As for Ning Qianqing, Li Tianlan really didn't expect him. I'm one of the representatives of the Eastern Theater of Operations. Ning Qianqing said with a gloomy face. The representative of the Eastern Theater of Operations, Li Tianlan was stunned. He looked at Ning Qianqing and didn't say anything for a while. Ning Qianqing's father, Ning Ziyuan, was the commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations in Zhongzhou State. The Eastern Theater of Operations invested so much in the Battle of Changdao that it was incredible. In terms of strength, it was hard to say which force was the most powerful. But in terms of numbers, the Eastern Theater of Operations invested more than any other force in Zhongzhou State. Ning Qianqing became one of the representatives of the Eastern Theater of Operations, which meant that he had become one of the leaders of the Eastern Theater of Operations in the plot against East Island. Have you talked to General Ning? Li Tianlan asked softly. He knew very well about the knot between Ning Qianqing and Ning Ziyuan. He couldn't empathize with the past, but if the father and son could reconcile, it wouldn't be a bad thing anyway. No. Ning Qianqing's gloomy face showed some confusion. It was the marshal who called me. He asked me to go. Dongqing Wudi's order? Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat and his eyes suddenly became deep. The commander of the Border Praetorian Corps was intentionally or unintentionally interfering in the affairs of the Eastern Theater of Operations. What did this mean? Zhongzhou State, East Island, inside and out. It seemed that everything was getting more and more complicated. I got it. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time before he nodded and said, let's go downstairs and talk. Ning Qianqing agreed. The two of them went downstairs side by side. For a while, no one spoke. Marshal Dongqing, do you have a good relationship with General Ning? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. How good can it be? Just a nodding acquaintance. At least as far as I know, the two of them didn't have any contact before. At most, they just greeted each other at a meeting. Ning Qianqing shook his head gently. That's what I'm most surprised about. The Eastern Theater of Operations sent 2 batches to Changdao, and more than 80% of them were my father's henchmen. After these people left, his control over the Eastern Theater of Operations would decline. It's impossible that he didn't know that the marshal asked me to be the representative of the Eastern Theater of Operations. Now the result is, he didn't continue but started to think. Li Tianlan didn't say anything either. The current situation was really complicated. The struggle in the dark world was complicated, the attitude of East Island was complicated, and the entanglement behind the scenes in Zhongzhou State was also complicated. Li Tianlan had seen some things clearly now. But the more he saw, the more he realized that he couldn't see. When the wind and rain stopped and the sun rose. In front of Li Tianlan's eyes, there was still a mist. After seeing Li Badian and Ning Qianqing off, Li Tianlan stood alone in the yard, enjoying the sunshine and fresh air that he hadn't seen for a long time. But his mind had already drifted somewhere. The breeze blew softly in the sunshine, bringing with it a gradually burning warmth. A deep voice suddenly rang out and interrupted Li Tianlan's thoughts. Good morning, young master. Su Chu, who was as tall as a giant, stood in front of Li Tianlan, giving off a sense of oppression and power. Good morning. Li Tianlan opened his eyes and nodded with a smile. But his eyes instinctively moved to the back of Su Chu. Behind Su Chu, 3 figures in black were standing quietly, not revealing any aura. Under the bright sunshine, there seemed to be darkness spreading around the 3, swallowing everything around them. Martial uncle? Li Tianlan froze for a moment, then smiled in surprise. You're back from Dongdu? Among the 3 men in black, Tribulation, who stood in the center, nodded and said in a low voice, just arrived. Before Li Tianlan could speak, he continued, Tianlan, change your clothes. There will be a meeting later, and you'll attend it with us. Li Tianlan's smile suddenly froze on his face. He knew that he would attend this meeting, but he didn't expect that he would attend it with Sai City instead of Samsara Palace. The news was so sudden that he wasn't mentally prepared at all. Martial uncle, his smile slowly faded, and he said calmly, where are Duke and the others? Tribulation was silent for a moment, and then he said calmly, they've left, a few hours ago. They've all left? They've all left. Tribulation nodded. But they'll attend the meeting later, and Sai City will take care of everything you have in East Island from now on. Li Tianlan's mouth moved, but he couldn't say anything. At this moment, he suddenly thought of Li Baidian, Ning Qiancheng, and several super masters of Samsara who had left without saying goodbye. However, those vivid images, including Tribulation, had all become chess pieces in his mind at this time. He himself became a chess piece. The general trend was like a chessboard, and everyone was a chess piece. In every slight or serious turbulence of the situation, all the chess pieces were uncontrollably moving closer or farther away. Involuntarily. Faintly, he could clearly sense that some things were approaching him, while others were moving further away from him. It turned out that the farther away. Li Tianlan looked calm. Chapter 198. Everything seemed to be unstoppable. This was Li Tianlan's sudden thought. The wind and rain in the dark world seemed to be changing all the time. Being in the rainstorm, Li Tianlan had a feeling that if Zhongzhou State's plot against East Island at the beginning was just a pure accident, then the layout after the accident was full of artificial traces. At this point, Li Tianlan wasn't sure if the situation was out of Zhongzhou State's control. But in the general trend, he could already see a looming black hand pushing everything forward. The departure of Samsara. All the superpowers entered Chengdao. Even the activity of Mount Shu and the Eastern Theater of Operations. And the current currency war. Every step seemed to be under the control of the Black Hand, and it never deviated from the original track. And as time went by, all the current events seemed to be slowly coming to an end. 7 days. When the time passed, what would happen to Zhongzhou State, East Island, and the superpowers in the dark world? Li Tianlan thought silently. At this moment, he felt very complicated inside. This kind of view of the general trend from a very high place with very low strength was broad enough, but it didn't feel good. He could clearly feel that something was slowly changing, but he couldn't do anything about it, so he was unwilling to accept it. He stood very high, but not the highest, because there was still wind and rain above his head, so he was depressed. If I am invincible, Li Tianlan laughed at himself, looked at Tribulation in front of him, and nodded. I see. At this moment, his expression was calm and tough, as if he could suppress everything. But how horrible it would be when all the suppression broke out. He took a deep breath, hid all his emotions, and suddenly said, Who are these two? The 2 men in black who came with Tribulation were a man and a woman. The woman looked younger, at most 30 years old, with a plump figure and delicate skin. She wore loose black clothes and wore no makeup. She looked a little mysterious and enchanting, like a black rose. At first glance, she looked weird, but at a closer look, she had a kind of charm. The man next to the woman had a beard and a weathered face. He was tall and thin, and his ordinary appearance looked extremely gentle. When they didn't speak, they stood beside Tribulation like 2 shadows, dark and ethereal, without any sense of existence. But Li Tianlan clearly felt danger from them. That faint, almost non-existent feeling made him instinctively vigilant, and even his body seemed to be subconsciously in a defensive state. Assassin. This was Li Tianlan's first impression. An assassin who did not reveal his aura or even carry killing intent was undoubtedly a top-notch assassin. I'm Yumu. Before Tribulation could introduce her, the woman standing on his left had already bowed slightly. She was obviously in a low position, but she did it with elegance and arrogance. Her voice was clear and extremely cold, yet it carried a trace of tenderness that made one's heart tremble. I'm Sunset Shadow. The middle-aged man on the right side of Tribulation laughed freely and heroically, with a kind of unique coldness and boldness after being attacked by wind and snow. His voice was not very loud, but it was extremely clear and sounded penetrating. In Li Tianlan's slightly narrowed eyes, Yumu and Sunset Shadow bowed at the same time and said calmly, "Greetings, young master." Young master. Su Chu's face suddenly changed. Dongqing Yueshan, who had just stepped into the villa and saw the scene, was also shocked. Only Li Tianlan, the person involved, remained calm. He suppressed all his inner emotions at the bottom of his heart and always maintained extreme calmness and restraint. Young master, he muttered to himself, then nodded and repeated, "Well, young master, from today on, you are the young governor of Sai City. From now on, there will always be a place for you on Mount Taibai." Tribulation looked at Li Tianlan, who was as calm as the deep sea in front of him, and said with unquestionable determination, "No matter what." Li Tianlan looked up at Tribulation. Tribulation was dressed in black, and the silver mask hid all his expressions, but his eyes were shining with cold and blazing light. No matter what. The meaning of these 4 words seemed to be more meaningful than the identity of the young governor of Sai City. And it was much more meaningful. From Qin Weibai's man to the young governor of Sai City. From a strange young heavenly son to the descendant of the Li family. This was especially so for the former. A private identity that was sufficiently illustrious but tainted with too much ambiguity had directly become an official identity that could not be underestimated. Li Tianlan could adapt to it, but he couldn't and didn't want to adapt to this change. There was still a mist in front of him, but some clear outlines had begun to appear in the mist. Why? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. He was baffled by this question, but he believed that Tribulation could understand what he meant. I don't know. Tribulation was not at a loss, but he did not give any answer. Still too weak. Li Tianlan laughed at himself and said, "Too weak. Do you regret it?" Tribulation looked at Li Tianlan and asked. Li Tianlan's strength was actually not weak. If he did not choose to recultivate, with his strength of the thunder-shocking realm and his current wind and thunder veins, even in this battle of Changdao, no one dared to ignore him, just like Wang Xingxiao now. Tribulation couldn't tell Li Tianlan any answer, but he knew that if Li Tianlan hadn't recultivated, this period of time, which was not wasted but could be regarded as tempering, was enough for Li Tianlan to go further in the thunder-shocking realm and even reach the stabilization phase. If Li Tianlan had not recultivated, everything that happened today might have been a different plan. I don't regret it. Li Tianlan shook his head and said softly, I just don't want to give up. After a long silence, Tribulation reached out and patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder, saying faintly, time will prove everything. Li Tianlan smiled and said, I'm going to change clothes, and then go to the meeting. Tribulation nodded and watched Li Tianlan's figure walk back into the villa. He walked so calmly, but no one could know that his heart had been twisted into a ball. That was the most direct pain and confusion. The moment he heard the words, young governor of Sai City, he had already understood. Some things did not just leave him, but were cut off. The most thorough, complete cut. Li Tianlan did not know the future, but he could feel that, at least for a long time, it was almost impossible for the things that were cut off to be reunited. Time passed by only for a moment. Li Tianlan's figure reappeared again. His expression was still calm, but his clothes had changed. A black suit, a black tie, and a white shirt. Li Tianlan, who was dressed so formally for the first time, did not look uncomfortable at all. The clean and tidy black made him look more spirited, and his eyes, which had always been calm and gentle, began to show sharpness gradually. "Let's go." Li Tianlan walked to Tribulation and said, "Su Chu and Rushi will go with me." Tribulation nodded, took out a willow leaf-shaped badge from his arms, and pinned it on Li Tianlan's chest. The lines of the badge were beautiful and smooth, and the whole body was black. But the center of the badge was engraved with a thin but extremely bright white line, which ran directly through the whole willow leaf from top to bottom. Like the first ray of light in the darkness, it suddenly rose, vast and dazzling. "This is the badge of Sai City. I should have given it to you earlier, but now it's not too late." Tribulation personally put the badge on Li Tianlan and said softly. Li Tianlan tightly pursed his lips and nodded. The badge was put on Li Tianlan's chest. This willow leaf seemed to be extraordinarily heavy, and a powerful force hit his heart. The sound of being cut seemed to ring in his ears again, and it was irresistible. Li Tianlan instinctively gritted his teeth and straightened his body. At this moment, everyone could clearly feel Li Tianlan's almost cold calmness. It seemed that he was suppressing something, and also seemed to be enduring something. The morning sun turned into a scorching sun, and the sky was clear. The storm had stopped, but it was not over. In the hot and dull air, Li Tianlan walked out of the tree-lined courtyard and went straight to the venue. Beside him was Tribulation, the king of shadow in the dark world. They were Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow, the top assassins who had become more and more representative of Sai City in recent years. They were Dongxing Rushi and Su Chu, the two geniuses of the younger generation who had risen to fame. And in the venue in front of him, on the left and right, there were Ning Qiansheng and Li Beidian, all his brothers. Through the sunlight outside the car window, Li Tianlan's eyes were unprecedentedly firm and cold. The venue was located on a mountain in the south of the club. The mountain was moderate in height, and the meeting room, which was like a hall, stood on the top of the mountain, full of mottled ancient traces. When Li Tianlan and the others arrived, there were still people coming in and out of the wide door of the meeting room. It seemed that Li Tianlan's initial speculation was not so correct. At least there were many people who could participate in this meeting, and only a few people could have decision-making power. Li Tianlan pushed the door and got out of the car. He walked to the door of the meeting room without hesitation, not even glancing at the scenery around the mountain top. Whether it was Tribulation, Deep Dream, Sunset Shadow, or Su Chu, they all consciously kept a distance from Li Tianlan and crowded around him. Only Dongxing Yueshan naturally held Li Tianlan's arm and followed him. Outside the door of the laboratory, more and more people began to stop. They looked at Li Tianlan and the top assassins of Sai City behind him with complicated eyes. Li Tianlan completely ignored everything. He walked in a straight line and walked into the door of the meeting room unhurriedly. Almost at the same time, another group of people stepped out of the door of the meeting room. The moment the two sides faced each other, the atmosphere seemed to freeze. Duke walked in the front, and beside him were Horsewoman and Flaming Fire. Duke looked at Li Tianlan with an indifferent expression. Li Tianlan was expressionless. The two sides, who should have been close, seemed to be hostile. The meeting room was a circular space, surrounded by layers of leather chairs. The outermost circle was the largest and had the most people sitting on it. The larger circle surrounded the smaller circle, and the deeper it was, the fewer seats there were. Everyone's status could be seen from where they sat. The one closest to the center of the circle naturally had a higher status. Li Tianlan glanced around and took a step directly. He was still walking in a straight line. The distance between Samsara Palace and Sai City was rapidly narrowing. Everyone noticed this scene. Regardless of whether they were inside or outside, everyone raised their heads and watched quietly. Duke didn't move. Li Tianlan moved forward. 7 meters. 5 meters. 3 meters. Li Tianlan's direction didn't change at all. He moved forward, straight ahead. At the moment when the two sides were about to collide, there seemed to be a sigh in the air. Duke's body quietly gave way and walked to the side. Li Tianlan walked over calmly, without stopping or looking back. Under the bright lights in the meeting room, Li Tianlan, in a black suit, walked through the outermost area, walked through the center, and went straight to the core area of the meeting room. There were two people worthy of his attention. Wang Xingxiao, who represented the Wang family of Beihai. Gu Hanshan, who represented Kunlun City. And he, who represented Sai City. In the silence, only the footsteps of Li Tianlan and his party echoed in the room. The light fell softly. At this moment, Li Tianlan was still unhurried, but his whole body seemed to have a trace of majesty and sharpness that was almost grand and magnificent. No one stopped Li Tianlan from moving forward. No one raised the slightest objection. On this day in Chengdao, under the silent gaze of countless special warfare elites of Zhongzhou State, Li Tianlan walked into the meeting room that represented power, status, and responsibility, and finally sat down in the most central area. There were many people around him, but there were only two young people. Wang Xingxiao. Gu Hanshan. Dressed up. Li Tianlan's feet stepped on the ground, and his expression became more and more indifferent. The era was under his feet. As time went by, today was just the beginning. Chapter 199. At this moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Li Tianlan. The venue was quiet, but in the silence, there seemed to be a storm brewing and becoming turbulent. The lights above were getting brighter and brighter. A huge crystal chandelier was placed in the center of the ceiling. Around the chandelier, the ceiling was also covered with circles of small lights. When all the lights were on, the whole venue was full of light, without a trace of darkness. Faces of anger, coldness, excitement, jealousy, mockery, or hatred were clearly reflected under the lights of the venue, like the hundreds of expressions of all living beings. No one would question the strength of Sai City. They had the absolute strength to have a place in the center of the venue. But when Sai City and the descendant of the Li family came together, the emotions that emerged in most people's hearts were suspicion and hatred. Nearly 20 years had washed away the glory of the Li family, but the grievances and even hatred left at the beginning were still clear. For the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, at least for a considerable number of people in the special warfare system, they could accept a young heavenly son with wind and thunder veins, but they could not accept a peerless genius with the inheritance of the Li family. It had nothing to do with position or hatred, but the overall situation. The name Li Tianlan now meant too many things. If it was expressed in the simplest words, it would be turbulence, change, and chaos. But the overall situation of Zhongzhou State was stable. The venue became silent and then cold. It was bitterly cold. In silence, Li Tianlan had already sat down in the center, waiting quietly. Countless eyes were intertwined and gathered on him. Li Tianlan was expressionless and faced it calmly. He was facing it, not bearing it. At this moment, no one knew how strong Li Tianlan's heart was, and how fragile it was. He would rather face the entire world than bear even a tiny bit of it. He didn't want to, and he didn't dare to. Isn't this too ostentatious? In the center of the venue, Li Beidian frowned slightly and said to himself, sitting in a seat slightly behind Li Tianlan. The seats in the venue were round, and Li Beidian sat right opposite Li Tianlan. Looking at Li Tianlan's face, Li Beidian frowned. With his status, he really needs to show off for once. Next to Li Beidian, a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s smiled and said. The middle-aged man was a bit shorter than Li Beidian, so he wasn't very tall. However, his smiling face could be said to be elegant and extraordinarily handsome. The man wore a moon-white robe, and his hair was also as white as snow, so white that there wasn't a single impurity in it. White clothes, white hair, a face like jade, the man's every move was extremely restrained, without the slightest sword intent, but his entire person was like a famous sword that had been sheathed. Although he didn't reveal his edge, he had a kind of reserved and arrogant feeling. A simple and unadorned broad-edged longsword that was black and white was placed next to his hand. With the man and the sword matching each other, the middle-aged man's every word and action were full of confidence and elegance. The Yin-Yang sword master of Mount Shu, Han Chongyang. He was one of the strongest thunder-shocking realm experts in Zhongzhou State. He did not enter the list of the top 10 contemporary experts in Zhongzhou State, but what he lacked was not strength but prestige. Third senior brother seems to know something. Li Beidian looked at Han Chongyang in surprise. Nearly 30 swordsmen from Mount Shu entered Chengdao this time, and less than 10 people entered the venue. But only Li Beidian could sit side by side with Han Chongyang. What can I know? Han Chongyang's smile remained unchanged, but his eyes became deeper and deeper. As the light flowed, he hid all his emotions. Shit, something is wrong no matter how I think about it. In front of his senior brother, Li Beidian had always been unscrupulous, to the extent that he had no taboo. What's going on? I thought Tianlan would come with the people from Samsara. Why is he with the people from Sai City? It's not that the people from Sai City are bad, but Tianlan and Goddess Qin were like glue not long ago. Why did he suddenly turn against them? Turn against them? Han Chongyang raised his eyebrows and chuckled in a low voice. What were you looking at just now? If they really turned against each other, would Li Tianlan dare to walk so close to Duke? At that distance, if Duke wanted to take action, no matter how talented Li Tianlan was, even if tribulation was by his side, he would definitely die. And who was Duke? He was the fourth super master of Samsara. If they really turned against each other, would he voluntarily make way for Li Tianlan? Boy, don't look at everything on the surface. Li Beidian was stunned. He didn't speak for a long time. He tried to recall the moment when Li Tianlan passed by the three super masters of Samsara. After a long time, he said softly, "Third senior brother, are you saying that Tianlan and Samsara are acting? They did it on purpose? Samsara must have done it on purpose. Maybe Li Tianlan has noticed something?" Noticed what? How do I know? You must know. I won't tell you even if I know. What? Li Beidian's face turned red. After a long time, he took a breath and shook his head. It's still not right. Isn't his acting too clumsy? Third senior brother, can't so many people in the venue see what you can see? How is that reasonable? You have to see what they are looking at. Han Chongyang said slowly, it also depends on what Samsara is acting. You said yourself that Li Tianlan and the woman of Samsara are very close. I heard that in the dark world, she is like a goddess. Given their relationship, who can believe that they will break up completely? Samsara doesn't expect others to believe it. The woman of Samsara wants to give Li Tianlan an identity that has nothing to do with Samsara. But this identity must be strong enough, and Sai City is the best choice. What's the point? Li Beidian was still puzzled. The point? Han Chongyang said with a faint smile, of course it's meaningful. At least now Li Tianlan is a member of Sai City, and Samsara has at least made a move to draw a clear line with Li Tianlan on the surface. At this time, whoever says that Li Tianlan has something to do with Samsara will offend Sai City first. But that's only on the surface? Li Beidian looked at Han Chongyang. Han Chongyang nodded. His white hair rose gently, and there seemed to be sword intent dancing in his hair. On the surface, that's enough. He said slowly. This time, Li Beidian didn't ask whether it was meaningful or not. Instead, he looked thoughtful. In his mind, Samsara's inexplicable change was too abrupt. When the will of the master of Samsara Palace was silent, Qin Weibai was the will of Samsara Palace. There was no doubt about that. But at the very beginning, Qin Weibai was almost wild and unrestrained to get closer to Li Tianlan, and she even offered herself to Li Tianlan. How long had it been? Why did Qin Weibai want to draw a clear line with Li Tianlan? And she didn't really draw a clear line. What did she want to do? This change seemed to be around the time when Zhongzhou State plotted against East Island. But Samsara and Zhongzhou State cooperated to plot against East Island, no. Cooperation. Li Beidian suddenly looked up at Han Chongyang. His back was soaked in cold sweat almost instantly, and it even flowed down along his forehead. So far, Zhongzhou State and Samsara had indeed cooperated happily. But were they really cooperating? If Samsara really wanted to cooperate, why did she want to draw a clear line with Li Tianlan at this time? Samsara, Li Baidian opened his mouth and suddenly found his tone so weak. Third senior brother, Samsara is disloyal, isn't it? They have their standpoint. Han Chongyang's tone was calm. Standpoint, standpoint. Li Baidian's mind was complicated, and he didn't even know how he felt in his heart. This plot of Zhongzhou State is a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy from all sides, and no one knows who will succeed until the end. Hey, third senior brother, if Samsara is disloyal, what will happen to Zhongzhou State? What's the standpoint of our Mount Shu? Han Chongyang turned his head very slowly and looked at Li Baidian with no expression on his face. Li Baidian's face gradually turned pale. Nearly 3,000 people, including Northern Europe, North America. Is it, Zhongzhou State will win? Han Chongyang suddenly said in a firm and erratic tone, I don't have to help Samsara. I don't have that obligation, right? Li Baidian believed this 100%, but in his heart, it was only half a sentence. If you don't help Samsara, what about Zhongzhou State? He suddenly asked. In his sight, Han Chongyang had turned his head. Li Baidian could only see Han Chongyang's cold side face in a long silence. He looked at Han Chongyang and then at Li Tianlan, but he suddenly thought of Samsara. At this moment, Li Baidian felt crazy. Extreme crazy. Why are you sitting here? Perhaps it was because the silence in the venue had been too long, so when a voice that was not deliberately lowered suddenly sounded, it sounded particularly clear. This question was calm and indifferent, but there seemed to be a kind of extremely heavy power between the lines. The voice sounded right beside him. Li Tianlan slightly raised his eyebrows and casually turned his head. The gaze beside him fell straight on his face. It was calm and indifferent, without anger or hatred, but with a little doubt. The other party seemed to really wonder why Li Tianlan could sit here, and he had no other thoughts. This kind of gaze was undoubtedly the most hurtful. Gu Hanshan, the young master of Kunlun City. Everyone's spirits were lifted. It was as if the show they had been looking forward to for a long time had finally begun. The descendant of the Li family made a high-profile appearance on such an occasion. It was of extraordinary significance to the entire special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. Others might be dissatisfied or hostile, but they could bear it. At least they would not show up on such an occasion. But Kunlun City was different. Not to mention the inside story of Li Guangtu's treason, it was an indisputable fact that Gu Xingyun's rise and eventual overthrow of the Li family. When the Li family reappeared, everyone could remain silent, but Kunlun City could not. The silence of others could be regarded as wait and see. Once Kunlun City was silent, it might mean retreat and a guilty conscience in the eyes of others. Li Tianlan's appearance was undoubtedly the most variable that could affect Kunlun City's status today. He was the most direct threat, and once he grew up, he could even be said to be the most deadly threat. Mortal enemy. Such a relationship could not be concealed even if they wanted to. Kunlun City had to speak today. No matter whether their words were useful or not, they had to express their attitude at least. Who are you? Li Tianlan's expression did not change, and he asked indifferently. His expression and tone were also sincere. Except for doubt, there was no other emotion. But these two short sentences were instantly full of a sense of tit for tat. It was impossible for Gu Hanshan not to see Sai City beside Li Tianlan. It was also impossible for Li Tianlan not to know Gu Hanshan. One was intentionally provoking him, while the other was blatantly looking down on him. Gu Hanshan's eyes flickered, but he remained calm. The appearance of the young master of Kunlun City was indeed unremarkable and ordinary, but his eyes were full of absolute sharpness and dominance. He sat quietly in his seat, but he gave people an indescribable sense of mystery and danger. His eyes, which could leave a deep impression at any time, slowly glanced around. Some people in charge of special warfare agencies at the back of the venue seemed to want to stand up, but when they saw Gu Hanshan shake his head slightly, they sat back down. Gu Hanshan's eyes kept sweeping over several positions in the core area of the venue. The most central position of the venue was extremely limited, and it actually belonged to several superpowers. The Wang family of Beihai, Kunlun City, and Sai City, the three superpowers with experts of the invincible realm, naturally deserved this position. In addition, Samsara must also have a place. Azure Dragon Gongsun Chi of Zhongzhou State and his Terracotta Army were the nominal supreme leaders of this action, so they naturally had to be in the most central position. In addition, there was originally Mount Shu. But this time, it was Han Chongyang, the Yin and Yang Sword Master, who came to Changdao, not Wei Kunlun, the Nirvana Sword Master. So Mount Shu's position consciously moved backward. In this way, the situation suddenly became clear. Each of the 5 superpowers who were qualified to sit in the most central position could at least send a top expert of the half-step invincible realm. The Wang family of Beihai sent Firmament, and the Enchantress also vaguely had the combat capability close to the half-step invincible realm. Tribulation sent Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow were also the most outstanding assassins in Sai City in recent years. Samsara had Saint in charge, and in today's meeting, they were currently waiting for another important figure from Samsara. As for himself, the combination of Ice Crystal and Ice Frost Sword could be said to be a half-step invincible realm expert. In addition, his uncle Gu Zhendong was also here. Gu Hanshan's eyes gradually burst out a trace of presumptuous brilliance. He quietly glanced in the direction of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Xingxiao yawned a little bored and whispered something to Firmament and the Enchantress beside him, as if he didn't care about the tension here at all. The Terracotta Army was destined to be neutral. As for Samsara, judging from the atmosphere between them and Li Tianlan just now, it seemed unlikely that they would make a move today. In this way, there was only Sai City left. Gu Hanshan suddenly smiled, and his eyes became sharper. A smile appeared on his plain face, and there was an indescribable kind of exuberance. I'm the young governor of Kunlun City. What qualification do you have to sit next to me? It's a joke that the descendant of a traitor wants to enter the room. Gu Hanshan's tone gradually became cold. It's a shame to sit with you. Now I have a suggestion. He moved his fingers and said indifferently, get out. In the future, when you rush forward, you should first ask yourself, do you deserve it? His voice echoed so clearly in the audience, calm and soft, but with a strong sense of humiliation and mockery. Tribulation moved his body. When he was about to get up, Li Tianlan suddenly reached out and pressed his shoulder. What if I don't get out? He asked calmly. Descendant of a traitor, do you deserve it? Gu Hanshan looked at Li Tianlan lightly and asked. I'm here now. Do you want to see for yourself whether I deserve it or not? Li Tianlan's eyes became colder and colder. Gu Hanshan laughed and said the same thing, descendant of a traitor, do you deserve it? He smiled gently, but his eyes were full of disdain and disdain. Well said. Descendant of a traitor, do you deserve to sit here? Get out. In the corner of the middle of the venue, a bald man suddenly stood up and shouted angrily. Today, I finally know what shamelessness is. How dare you show up here? Think of the innocent souls killed by your father. Now, Li Tianlan, do you deserve it? Another middle-aged woman stepped forward with a vicious sneer on her face. Ha ha ha, a peerless genius with wind and thunder veins? You scared me. Do you deserve to be compared with the Wang family of Beihai and the young master of Kunlun City? Bullshit. They will be heavenly sons when they grow up. What about you? You're a scourge. Get out. Do you deserve to come to this venue? Get out. Traitor. Do you deserve it? A terrible sound suddenly rolled up in the venue. The storm that had been brewing for a long time broke out completely. All the special warfare agencies related to Kunlun City stood up, and the sound was like a tide. The era of the Li family had long passed. Now in Zhongzhou State, there was only Kunlun City. They didn't need the Li family, nor did they welcome the former war god family. The sound waves spread layer by layer. For a moment, the words, "Do you deserve it?" seemed to be the only thing in the world, echoing in Li Tianlan's ears. But the clearest voice was Gu Hanshan's. He still smiled gently, looked at Li Tianlan calmly and mockingly, and said, "Do you deserve it?" Li Tianlan also smiled. Bearing the condemnation around him, the corners of his mouth rose, and he smiled happily and comfortably. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he stood up. At the same time, a dazzling and sharp sword light also rose up. The sword light was like a waterfall. In an instant, it rose from the ground to the roof. All the lights were dim, and the whole conference room seemed to be split in half by a sword. The sword light crossed the venue but did not disappear. Instead, it completely condensed. There was no high temperature, no intention, only the purest sword intent rose to the peak in an instant, with a sharpness that could tear everything. The 13th blade reverse scale. Under the bright sword light, there seemed to be darkness spreading around Li Tianlan. His figure disappeared for a moment. Gu Hanshan had already risen into the air. The raging fire suddenly burst out from his body, illuminating everything, but it could not illuminate the darkness around Li Tianlan. The sword light brought with it a strong killing intent and a violent rage. It flashed and disappeared from top to bottom. Light and fire blended with each other. The moment the sword light disappeared, countless sparks exploded around Gu Hanshan, splashing in all directions. The sword light suddenly spread all over the venue, and countless chairs exploded layer by layer. The clothes of some peripheral elites of Kunlun City sitting behind Gu Hanshan were all torn, and they looked embarrassed. In the fire, Gu Hanshan, who had risen into the air, fell down at a faster speed. His body landed steadily on the ground, but 2 streaks of blood shot out of his nostrils. Gu Hanshan glanced at Li Tianlan, and when he was about to speak, he suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. The audience was in an uproar. The young master of Kunlun City was defeated? Gu Hanshan glanced at Li Tianlan expressionlessly, closed his mouth tightly, and sat down with the help of ice crystal and ice frost. Before entering Changdao, he had been chased by Heavenly Hound, the left advisor of Wuji Palace, for many days. Although he successfully entered Changdao under the cover of ice crystal and ice frost, he had not recovered yet. In a hurry, he faced Li Tianlan's full sword strike, and he could not exert his peak strength, so he suffered a loss. Li Tianlan's body was still standing in the air. The sword light and the fire had all disappeared. But the air around him was violently twisted. At the place closest to the chandelier in the venue, a void of darkness almost completely covered his body. In the darkness, everyone could feel a pair of cold and indifferent eyes staring at them. That pair of eyes was constant and awe-inspiring, with inviolable pride and majesty. At this moment, no one in the venue was willing to face that pair of eyes. A clear, arrogant, calm, and crazy voice rang in everyone's ears, one word at a time, like thunder. My grandfather is Li Honghe. My father is Li Guangtu. My name is Li Tianlan. In the darkness, his voice paused, and then he said gloomily, "You. Who do you think you are?" Some people were in a trance. Some people looked furious. Some people looked cold. However, what most people felt was fear. Among all the people present, only one person looked sad, self-deprecating, and helpless. That was Thunder God. Chapter 200. Swords were drawn. The atmosphere in the venue was completely frozen. Gu Hanshan slowly wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and sat in his seat with a cold expression. He really did not expect that Li Tianlan would dare to fight on such an occasion. It was not a big deal for him to suffer losses and get hurt, but it made him extremely angry to lose face. After today, everyone present would think that he, the young master of Kunlun Immortal World, had lost to Li Tianlan. The sword just now was brilliant, but it also cast a shadow over his reputation as a young heavenly son. There were real reasons why he had not recovered from his serious injury and was caught off guard. But in the dark world, where the winner was king, what was the use of constantly emphasizing objective reasons? Not to mention whether anyone would believe it, even if someone did, so what? A defeat was a defeat. Gu Hanshan twitched the corner of his mouth, and a violent killing intent flashed in his eyes. He closed his mouth tightly and said nothing. Li Tianlan still stood in the air. The darkness around him spread faster and faster, and the airflow kept twisting around him, as if to cover the whole venue. This was indescribable pride and arrogance. He was insufferably arrogant and had no one in his eyes. Just like what he said. Who do you think you are? The whole venue was silent for a moment. Then, a furious roar suddenly sounded in the venue. Bastard, who do you think you are? In fact, there were two voices, but both the tone and the tone were almost exactly the same. When the two voices were combined, it was like a person roaring. The roar condensed with strong killing intent surged in the venue, and the echo of the roar was still floating in the air. Two beams of sword light had appeared in front of Li Tianlan at the same time. Tribulation, dressed in black, moved his body as if he wanted to get up, but he restrained his desire to make a move. The somewhat hot temperature dropped instantly, and for a moment, the whole venue seemed to enter a frost kingdom. The sword light scattered, and the darkness around Li Tianlan was constantly compressed. Streaks of sword energy with cold intent almost completely enveloped his body. In his sight, two figures appeared in front of him. Exactly the same face. Identical swords. Ice Spirit. Frost. Although the two swords had not merged into one, when they attacked at the same time, the sword intents of the same origin merged with each other, and this sword still burst out the power beyond the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. There were only the tips of the two swords left in Li Tianlan's pupils. The tip of the sword pierced through the air, bringing with it a pale, cold and sinister sword aura, and directly pierced towards his left and right heart. Faint exclamations of surprise rang out in the venue. His resolute killing intent swept across the entire area. For Li Tianlan, this sword strike was a sure kill. It was not only because the attacker was the famous ice crystal frost sword of Kunlun City, but also because this sword was similar to a sneak attack. The moment the sword energy flashed, the edge of the ice crystal frost sword had almost reached Li Tianlan's chest. The speed of this sword was completely indescribable, and it had even vaguely exceeded the scope of the thunder-shocking realm. Such a sword, which could be called the trump card, could not be used without paying a price, even if it was the ice crystal frost sword. To kill Li Tianlan, Kunlun City could hardly care less about its identity and face. The sword light was like a shooting star. But time seemed to be slowed down by countless times. The darkness around Li Tianlan kept retreating under the pressure of the sword light, and the scene in front of him became extremely clear. At this moment, Li Tianlan could clearly see the pale, cold sword energy condensing around him. He could even clearly see the natural lines on the edge of the ice crystal frost sword and the gloomy and vicious eyes of the person behind the two swords. The two swords pushed forward at the same time. A cold and chilly sword light shone in the venue. The sword light was like ice and snow, and the sword intent was as cold as winter. In front of the two sword lights that were as dazzling and cold as the winter sun, Li Tianlan felt destruction and also saw a slender and vigorous palm. In the white sword light with a trace of coldness in the snow, the hand appeared abruptly and naturally. It was a very clean and neat palm with a clear outline. Although it was not big, every knuckle was full of power. In the sword light that enveloped everything around, this hand directly reached in. In an instant, the surrounding sword intent all became chaotic. The palm slowly closed in the sword intent that was as cold as ice. Li Tianlan could almost clearly feel that the surrounding sword intent was completely crushed by this palm. The airflow around the palm twisted rapidly and finally formed a transparent whirlpool. In the extremely quiet space, the whirlpool suddenly spun wildly. The ice crystal sword and the ice frost sword that were close to Li Tianlan's chest suddenly began to tremble violently. The stalemate lasted no more than 3 seconds. With a muffled groan from the Ice Frost Sword and the Ice Crystal Frost Sword, which were close to Li Tianlan's chest, the two swords suddenly lost control and clung to each other, falling into the palm that suddenly appeared. The sword intent brought by the Ice Crystal Frost Sword collapsed completely. A cold current suddenly rose in the venue, and the air was twisted into a circle of obvious airwaves. The airwaves were like tides, spreading to the whole venue with a powerful force. The whole venue was suddenly in chaos. Countless chairs were smashed under the impact of the airwaves. Some people in the middle of the venue even directly stood up to resist the sudden and rapid burst of power. Some elites of Zhongzhou state who were close to the door were even unable to resist. Under the impact of the almost majestic power, their whole bodies were lifted up, and they were thrown out of the door together with the pieces of chairs. The figures of the Ice Frost Sword and the Ice Crystal Sword were also blasted out more than 10 meters away, smashing into empty tables and chairs in the venue, bringing up a lot of smoke. Li Tianlan had already landed on the ground. A black figure walked past him at the same time as he landed and stopped in a small open space in the center of the venue. It was a figure wrapped in a black cloak. He was thin, mysterious, and strange. This was a figure that looked very lonely, but the moment Li Tianlan saw him, he felt that he saw a sea. Deep, surging, turbulent, and unfathomable. Saint? Wang Xingxiao, who seemed not to notice Li Tianlan, but in fact, had been paying attention to everything in the venue, suddenly raised his eyebrows and whispered to himself. No. Firmament, who was sitting beside him, shook his head slowly. The moment just now might seem long, but in fact, it was just a split second. But in that instant, it was enough for Firmament to feel the powerful and almost irresistible power of the other party. That was pure power and skill, not sword intent. This is Military Counselor. Firmament said with a serious expression. Military Counselor, who ranked second only to Saint among the 12 Super Masters of Samsara, was also the most mysterious Super Master in Samsara. It could be said that today was the Military Counselor's first real fight. Before that, many people had even speculated whether the Military Counselor was an ordinary person without the strength to truss a chicken. There were even voices that speculated that Qin Weibai was the Military Counselor. But the Super Master of Samsara had completely proved how powerful he was in that moment of attack. In terms of strength, he was even a Super Master who was not weaker than the first Super Master, Saint. Your Excellency, who are you? From the sneak attack of Ice Crystal Sword and Ice Frost to the appearance of the black-robed man, everything happened in the blink of an eye. When Ice Crystal Sword and Ice Frost landed on the ground, everyone finally reacted. Beside Gu Hanshan, Gu Zhendong, who had been silent, suddenly took a step forward, staring at the black-robed man who suddenly appeared, and asked in a low voice. Gu Zhendong was extremely burly, with thick eyebrows and big eyes. He looked like a valiant general, but in fact, for the dark world and the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, this was a relatively strange name. In recent years, in Kunlun City, Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianchuan, two invincible realm experts, were enough to control any situation. Below them, there were some thunder-shocking realm experts who had just joined Kunlun City in recent years. In this way, except for a few direct descendants of Kunlun City who walked outside, other people rarely appeared, and Gu Zhendong was one of them. But their absence did not mean that they were not powerful. In a way, people like Gu Zhendong were the real core of Kunlun City, as well as the foundation of Kunlun City. For the superpowers in the dark world, an opponent that was not understood was the most terrifying opponent. I'm Military Counselor. The man in the cloak said calmly. His voice was clear and elegant, giving people a feeling of extreme calmness and wisdom. Military Counselor? Gu Zhendong frowned and repeated, Military Counselor of Samsara. Not only Military Counselor of Samsara. He's also the Military Counselor of this operation. Military Counselor's tone was indifferent. Gu Zhendong was silent and didn't speak for a long time. Although he didn't come out often in Kunlun City, his authority was extremely high. And before today's meeting, some superpowers roughly knew the content of this meeting. Today, nearly 2,000 elites of Zhongzhou State in Chengdao were led by Gongsun Qi, the Azure Dragon of Zhongzhou State. Gongsun Qi had the leadership, but military counselor had the command. Zhongzhou State attached great importance to this conflict that swept the entire dark world. Yi Dongsheng, known as the god of army, was in the rear, while military counselor came to the front. The highlight of today's meeting was to successfully connect military counselor in Chengdao with god of army in Zhongzhou State, make a battle plan according to the current situation, and emphasize military counselor's command. The final battle was about force as well as wisdom. Moreover, Zhongzhou State had newly established the Snowdance Corps, and Gu Qianxuan was the first commander of the corps at a price. Giving up the leadership of East Island was one of the conditions put forward by Samsara when they cooperated with Zhongzhou State. In other words, military counselor who had the command could actually be on an equal footing with Gongsun Qi, at least in East Island. From the perspective of this final battle, it was not an exaggeration to say that everyone in Kunlun City was now military counselor's subordinates. Gu Zhendong felt depressed, but he didn't want to show weakness. He glared at military counselor and said with a cold smile, "So what if you're military counselor? You have the command power in this final battle, but do you also have the power to intervene in our internal affairs?" He pointed at Li Tianlan and said coldly, "Do you want to stand up for this man?" Everyone had noticed the fact that Samsara had cut off Li Tianlan. Although they didn't know what Samsara was going to do, military counselor had just saved Li Tianlan once. In any case, this should be against Samsara's current plan. Military counselor denied it as expected and said in a calm tone, "I don't stand up for anyone, but your dog blocked my way. Is it wrong for me to kick it away?" Dog. It seemed to be the first time that the famous Ice Crystal and Frost Sword of Kunlun City were called dogs since they became famous. Even when they joined forces and still lost to Wei Kunlun, the Nirvana Sword Master of Mount Shu, no one dared to humiliate them like this. Gu Zhendong's face was cold. Ice Crystal and Ice Frost, who had just climbed up from the mess, also looked furious. The three of them looked at each other and rushed to military counselor almost at the same time without any hesitation. "Kill!" Gu Zhendong roared furiously, and a bolt of blue lightning with a hint of strange purple suddenly formed in front of him. In an instant, the air in front of him surged backward, and only the purple lightning was growing rapidly. Gu Zhendong took a step forward, and the extremely dazzling lightning shot out instantly, as if it had passed through the void, and reached military counselor in an instant. Military counselor's figure seemed to be blurred in place, as if he had moved, but also as if he hadn't moved. But the lightning had already passed him and flew behind him. Gu Zhendong was expressionless. Behind him, Ice Crystal and Ice Frost had already rushed up. Full force, no. Military counselor's eyebrows twitched suddenly. At such a delicate moment, he found that although Ice Crystal and Ice Frost's posture was extremely firm, they were not attacking, but defending. Defending against what? Almost instinctively, military counselor's heart shook, and he said subconsciously, "Be careful." As soon as his voice came out, the purple lightning that passed through military counselor's figure had suddenly changed direction. The purple light instantly enveloped the whole venue. In the blurry light, Gu Zhendong's purple lightning had exploded into a light curtain. In the light curtain, killing intent was flowing, and thousands of sword intents covered Li Tianlan at the same time. It was still Li Tianlan. Gu Zhendong was expressionless, but there was determination in his eyes. From the standpoint of Kunlun City, Li Tianlan had to be killed no matter what, regardless of the occasion or place. As long as there was a chance, there should be no hesitation. Today's series of means might be despicable, but as long as Li Tianlan died, who would remember it as time passed? But Li Tianlan had to die. Not to mention how great a threat Li Tianlan would be to Kunlun City in the future. Even now, his existence would become a weapon used by some people with ulterior motives. There were too many inside stories behind Li Guangtu's incident. These years, Kunlun City had barely suppressed it. They thought that with the passage of time, this incident would become a thing of the past. But Li Tianlan's appearance was tantamount to giving others a reason to mention this incident again. For this reason alone, everyone in Kunlun City would feel terrified at the thought of it. They were not afraid of Li Tianlan's potential, but afraid of the series of unknown variables. As long as there was a chance to kill Li Tianlan, Gu Zhendong would not hesitate at all. In contrast, a little insult to Ice Crystal and Ice Frost was nothing. Whoosh! At the same time as the purple light exploded, an extremely sharp whistle sounded in the venue. A thick darkness directly wrapped Li Tianlan in it. Thousands of purple lights kept hitting the dark curtain around Li Tianlan. The black curtain shook violently and instantly shrank. In Gu Zhendong's gloomy expression, the black curtain wrapped in purple light flew to the top of the conference room at an extremely fast speed. Before everyone looked up, the black curtain had rushed out of the ceiling of the conference room. In the loud bang, a hole with a radius of about 10 meters was blown out of the ceiling. The sunlight from the outside world came in through the hole and perfectly blended with the light in the rising smoke and dust. Tribulation was already standing beside Li Tianlan. Under the mask, no one could see the expression of the King of Shadow clearly, but there was an undisguised violent killing intent in his low and hoarse voice. Tianlan is the young governor of Sai City. Gu Zhendong, you can kill him if you want. Do you really think that there is no one in Sai City? For consecutive transparent shadows surrounded Gu Zhendong at the first time. Tribulation's arms hung down, and 2 arm knives suddenly stuck out of his cuffs. Tianlan is my brother. Gu Zhendong, you can kill him if you want. Do you really think that there is no one in Mount Shu? On the other side of the conference room, Li Baidian suddenly pulled out the long sword beside him. Of course, this sword was not the Great Void Sword. But as the blade was unsheathed, Li Baidian's whole body emitted a kind of majestic sword intent that could almost go straight to the 9th heaven. Beside him, the Yin and Yang sword master of Mount Shu, Han Chongyang, sat still. All the swordsmen of Mount Shu around him also sat still, but their sword intent was concentrated on Li Baidian at the same time. At this moment, Li Baidian raised the long sword high. The bright blade trembled, and the amazing sword energy instantly crossed the distance of more than 10 meters and pointed directly at Gu Zhendong's throat. Tianlan is my brother. Gu Zhendong, you can kill him if you want. Do you really think that there is no one in the Eastern Theater of Operations? Ning Qianqing slowly stood up from the front seat of the Eastern Theater of Operations and said in a cold tone. The elites of the Eastern Theater of Operations came out in full force this time. Although there were only 2 Thundershocking Realm experts, more than 100 Fire-Flaming Realm experts were a force that no one dared to ignore. When this force was all gathered together, no expert of the half-step invincible realm dared to fight head-on. Tianlan is my fiancé. Gu Zhendong, you can kill him if you want. Do you really think that there is no one in the Dongqing clan? Dongqing Yueshan and Thunder God stood up almost at the same time. Sai City, Mount Shu, the Eastern Theater of Operations, the Dongqing clan, the whole venue suddenly became noisy, and the sound of discussion rang out in every corner. Plus, there was Samsara, whose attitude was ambiguous. Whether it was inside Zhongzhou State or outside Zhongzhou State, once this force was united, it could completely compete with Kunlun City. As long as Li Tianlan grew up. No wonder Kunlun City was so impatient that they even used some unpresentable means. The sounds of discussion came one after another, becoming more and more chaotic. Gu Zhendong, who took the initiative to sneak attack but failed again, glanced coldly at Tribulation standing beside Li Tianlan, and then looked at Wang Xingxiao. The force around Li Tianlan was obvious enough. If he really became powerful, then not only Kunlun City would be in trouble, but the Wang family of Beihai would also be in trouble. At this time, the Wang family of Beihai should always come out and say something. Wang Xingxiao looked at Gu Zhendong strangely and suddenly said with a smile, "Why are you looking at me like this? Do you think that there is no one in the Wang family of Beihai?" Gu Zhendong was so angry that he almost vomited blood. He suddenly turned around and was about to speak, when a noise louder than the discussion suddenly rang out in the conference room. Everyone was taken aback and subconsciously raised their heads. In the center of the conference room, just above the military counselor's position, a hanging big screen had been turned on. The volume of the conference room was very loud, and the voice of the East Island host on the screen clearly echoed in every corner of the conference room. And the translator in the conference room immediately translated the host's Japanese into Chinese and spread it to the whole conference room. All the voices of discussion gradually disappeared. People's expressions began to change gradually, from the confusion at the beginning to surprise, then to seriousness, and finally to solemnity. At 10:00 this morning, the East Island military held a press conference. The military spokesman said that in the next 7 days, there would be a large-scale anti-terrorism military exercise in Changdao. At present, the relevant departments were evacuating the people, and part of Changdao would be turned into the exercise area. There was silence in the conference room, and only the voice of the host and the translator echoed. Evacuate the people for the exercise. This reason seemed far-fetched, but it was a reason after all. And don't forget, this was Changdao, the most sparsely populated place in the whole East Island, and the place where they were hiding right now had even fewer people living nearby. If East Island used this area as a maneuver area, then the number of people who would be evacuated in the end would only be 100 or 200, and it would be a piece of cake. Obviously, East Island had begun to prepare for the battlefield. 7 days, the picture on the screen suddenly stopped. Gong Sun Chi's figure appeared at the door of the conference room. Looking at the messy scene in the conference room and the scary big hole in the ceiling, this azure dragon of Zhongzhou State smiled softly and walked into the conference room. His voice was gentle, and there seemed to be a little smile in it. Today is the first day. East Island people are preparing for the battlefield, and other dark forces are also preparing for the war. We, Zhongzhou State. He walked to military counselor and stopped. He glanced around and asked with a smile, "What are we doing in Zhongzhou State?" The whole conference room was quiet. Gu Zhendong, who didn't want to stop, hesitated and slowly sat down. Even tribulation pulled Li Tianlan to sit in his seat. Gong Sun Chi was known as the person who was closest to the invincible realm in the dark world, and he could even be said to be the first person in the half-step invincible realm. Whether or not people were convinced by this title, he was now the supreme leader in the Battle of Changdao. People still had to show him the respect he deserved. Tribulation patted Li Tianlan's shoulder gently, turned his head, and glanced at Gu Zhendong coldly. Gu Zhendong stared back at Tribulation without avoiding him, but his eyes were thoughtful. Although the fight with Tribulation was short, he had keenly sensed that something was wrong with Tribulation's state. When Tribulation attacked with all his strength, he seemed to be extremely powerful, but also extremely weak. This state made people feel quite weird. It was like one step to heaven and one step to hell, and Tribulation was standing on a wire rope between heaven and hell, swaying back and forth between glory and eternal damnation. Not to mention Tribulation's own mood, even the others were a little scared when they saw this. This state, Tribulation seemed to be injured. Although I have the title of leader, I don't think I can lead you. I can't intervene in your grievances. But now, in the face of the war, Gong Sun Chi, beg you to put national affairs first, and I hope you can put some grievances behind the war. Gong Sun Chi turned 360 degrees and gave a military salute to the meeting place. He put down his arm and continued to say with a smile, "I wonder if you are willing to do me this favor?" No one spoke. There was silence in the meeting place. Gong Sun Chi nodded and said, "I'll take it as a yes." He waved the thick pile of materials in his hand and continued, "Let me introduce today's meeting. Military Counselor of Samsara Supermaster will meet with our God of Army, Marshal Yi Dongsheng, in this meeting to make the next battle plan. And in my hand is some intelligence, including the experts of East Island and other martial arts forces who are in East Island at this time. Of course, the intelligence is not complete, but it's better to know more than nothing. Here, on behalf of Zhongzhou State, I thank Samsara Palace for the intelligence. If you don't mind, let's start the meeting now. We don't have much time, so we have to hurry." The scene on the screen of the meeting place changed. Yi Dongsheng, the god of army of Zhongzhou state, who wore a military uniform and the rank of marshal, appeared on the screen. Through the screen, he obviously noticed the countless broken seats in the meeting place. He was a little stunned, but he didn't say much. He just looked away and looked at military counselor standing next to Gong Sun Chi. "Your Excellency military counselor, please take care of me," he said calmly and raised his hand to give a salute. "Take care of each other." Military counselor bowed slightly, looking calm and indifferent. Military counselor and god of army. The moment the two successfully met, even the slowest people in the meeting place felt the pressure and coldness of the approaching final battle. This was bound to be a long meeting. Li Tianlan had calmed down and listened carefully. Time passed slowly. He rarely spoke on behalf of Sai City, and most of the time, he was taking notes. The scorching sun turned into the setting sun in the meeting place. The fiery color in the sky gradually dimmed. The setting sun was about to disappear, but the bright moon had already risen. After the storm, East Island began to welcome dusk for the first time. Finally, it became dark. When the night fell, it was also the time when the morning light was approaching. Time passed through the night in the meeting place, and it was close to dawn. Chapter 201. Time passed by the gorgeous rainy season, and the sky of Changdao was getting clearer and clearer. In the summer after the storm, the temperature rose quickly, and the hot sun shone on every corner of Changdao. Hot, dull, and depressing had become the theme of Changdao. The news about the military exercise of Changdao had been playing on TV. At 9:00 in the morning, when the news channel spread the news to every city in East Island again, there were still 6 days before the military exercise of Changdao. It was like a notice, but for some people, it was the most straightforward countdown. The war was coming. In the dull and hot weather, a large area in the southwest of Changdao had been completely emptied. It was an area of about 100 square kilometers, and most of it was mountainous. Usually, there were few people in this area. After the military of East Island designated this area as the military exercise area, the scattered civilians and a small village had all been evacuated. At this moment, under the clear sky, the mountains and rivers in this area were still the same, but the residents had all disappeared. It was like a dead zone full of vitality, but no one was there. Those who didn't know would never understand, but those who knew would know that this was the battlefield that the East Island officials had set in Changdao. It was an area with a radius of 100 square kilometers. It was a magnificent place. And this area had become a place where all the superpowers were studying. The map zoomed and enlarged on the screen, and the satellite images were transmitted in real time. Every corner of the southwest of Changdao was clearly shown on the screen as it zoomed in and out. The shabby curtains in the room were casually covered, blocking the hot and dazzling sunlight from the outside. An LCD screen that occupied almost the whole wall kept flashing. Jungles, mountains, rivers, lakes, parks, clubhouses. The satellite took pictures of all the terrains within a radius of 100 square kilometers and transmitted them to the screen. As the camera moved bit by bit, every part of the terrains became clear on the screen. The light in the empty room was dim. Only the misty light on the screen flickered, reflecting the entire room. The LCD screen that occupied the front wall could be said to be a very advanced device, but it seemed very out of place in the room. In terms of area, this was a rather large room, or even a hall, but there were no luxurious decorations in the hall. The curtains by the windows were dirty, and there was a set of shabby sofas that seemed to have been abandoned in the middle of the room. There seemed to be some spider webs in the corner, and in the dim environment, the surrounding walls seemed to have mostly peeled off. In such an environment, coupled with an advanced and luxurious LCD screen that was connected to a satellite, it seemed a little strange no matter how one looked at it. Several tall and short figures stood quietly in the hall. The hall was not small, and they did not stand together. Instead, they maintained a safe distance from each other. Although they were all on guard against each other, no one revealed any hostility. The image on the screen changed. It was silent. The few figures in the hall also stood silently on the spot, as if they were inanimate objects. Time continued to move forward as the screen continued to change. Light and shadow flickered in the dim hall, and the few figures stood still, looking gloomy and weird. This area is the battlefield that East Island left for us. In the oppressive and breathless silence, a person standing in the hall suddenly spoke, breaking the silence in the hall. He was the closest to the screen, and the light and shadow on the screen shone on him. His extremely skinny body also became clear in the light and shadow. From the view of the others, he looked like a skeleton in a black robe. The body under the black robe was empty, and there was an indescribable coldness about him. It looks big. That includes our current location. Another hoarse voice rang out. This voice was hoarse and strange, as if someone had torn off his vocal cords. It was a little unclear, and not only was it unpleasant to hear, it was even more terrifying to hear. But I still prefer to choose my own battlefield. I don't like this place. Ben, is the Heroes Club willing to accept the arrangement of East Island? Ben. The vice president of the American Heroes Club, and the first vice president at that, was the most powerful figure in the entire dark world. The Heroes Club could be said to be one of the oldest superpowers in the dark world. Its internal structure was extremely complicated, and its strength was also extremely powerful. At its peak decades ago, its power could be described as overwhelming in America, and it was the most powerful superpower in the entire dark world. Today's Heroes Club wasn't as dazzling as it was at its peak, but it didn't go downhill either. In the past 20 years, the Heroes Club's power kept expanding. 10 years ago, it opened up Africa, 5 years ago, and it entered Northern Europe. Its sphere of power was getting bigger and bigger. In America, where they first made their fortune, the Heroes Club had maintained a fairly transcendent position, whether it was South America or North America. This time, the plot of Zhongzhou State affected the entire dark world. The Heroes Club had already regarded the Battle of Changdao as an opportunity for them to penetrate into Asia. Ben, the first vice president, led the team to Changdao, which showed how cautious the Heroes Club was about the Battle of Changdao. The situation of the dark world in Asia had been stable and weird for the past countless years. West Asia was in constant war, and it could be said to be the paradise of the dark world. South Asia was full of fights for power and interests. The dark world and politics were closely related, complicated and sensitive. In these two places, West Asia meant chaos. Although this word was the eternal theme of the dark world, for the dark superpowers, excessive chaos also meant limited interests and possible unexpected losses. South Asia, on the other hand, meant trouble. The political factors, religious factors, ethnic hatred, and historical grievances combined to make the entire dark world of South Asia extremely crazy. Although the superpowers in the dark world were unwilling to give up these two areas, they hadn't been very diligent in their management for many years. As for East Asia and North Asia, they were the most stable places. North Asia and Eastern Europe had a large territory of snow country, which was the sphere of influence of the Polar Ground Alliance, the superpower in the dark world. In the whole of North Asia and Eastern Europe, the Polar Ground Alliance could be said to be the only superpower. In addition, Snow Country's political situation had been stable in recent years, so other superpowers couldn't find a chance to enter North Asia. Even if there was a chance, the Polar Ground Alliance, which was born as a fighting nation, would often take the initiative to attack and stop all threats outside its sphere of influence. East Asia, on the other hand, seemed to have been drifting away from the superpowers in the dark world in the past. Because Zhongzhou State, the world's well-deserved #1 superpower in both economy and military, was located here. Whether in the past or now, Zhongzhou State had only one superpower in the dark world. That was the Wang family of Beihai. Whether it was the former Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun, the current Kunlun city, or Sai City, they could all be said to be dark superpowers, but most of the time, in people's hearts, these superpowers were part of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, with a very strong official stance. The Wang family of Beihai in Zhongzhou State, the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. The two superpowers in Zhongzhou State were enough to keep out any superpower that attempted to enter Zhongzhou State. The superpowers had fought with Zhongzhou State before, and this kind of competition still existed today. More than 20 years ago, when the Heroes Club was at its peak, it once joined forces with Fantasy World and the Polar Ground Alliance to invade Zhongzhou State. The old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai and Li Honghe, the god of war of Zhongzhou State, joined hands and stopped several invincible realm experts outside the national border. In that battle, the old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai fought desperately against the siege of 3 invincible realm experts and returned with serious injuries after killing 2 invincible realm experts. A few years later, he died of illness. The Heroes Club, whose power was greatly reduced, also fell from its peak. 15 years ago, Night Spirit invaded Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State's Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong, who had just entered the Invincible Realm, held the Human Emperor and killed Night Spirit, an invincible realm expert of Night Spirit, at the border with one spear strike, which shocked the whole Dark World. After a short silence, the Jiang family of South America began to be active in Zhongzhou State again, but it was always difficult to make a name for itself. 5 years ago, Samsara began to cooperate with Zhongzhou State, but it was guarded by Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai. Although there was no major conflict among the 3 parties, they often fought secretly. Zhongzhou State was the most powerful overlord in the world today, the center of the Dark World, but also a rare pure land in the Dark World. Under the deterrence of Zhongzhou State, the whole of East Asia was peaceful. Gaoshan State's position was ambiguous, and it wavered between the Western powers and Zhongzhou State. Although East Island was powerful, most of its forces had been guarding against the invasion of Zhongzhou State. The peaceful situation had always been under the control of Zhongzhou State. For the world's major dark forces, this was not what they wanted to see. Because it meant too many interests and scruples. The dark forces of Zhongzhou State were the most aggressive in the world. Among them, the Wang family of Beihai was the most powerful, followed by Sai City, and then Kunlun City. This was not only because the Wang family of Beihai had Zhongzhou State's Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong, who was known as the #1 expert in the Dark World. More importantly, all the forces in Zhongzhou State had an extremely stable rear. This was the most unique phenomenon in the Dark World. The Heroes Club dominated America, but there was the Jiang family in South America, and Fantasy World in North America. The 3 forces entangled with each other while facing other forces. Europe could be said to be the most lively place in the Dark World now. The remnants of Night Spirit, Samsara Palace, Dark Knights, Knights Templars, the Vatican, and various consortiums were entangled with each other. There were many conflicts that even the parties involved couldn't tell how they happened. The Polar Ground Alliance dominated Snow Country and Eastern Europe, but too many historical reasons doomed the Polar Ground Alliance to face a lot of troubles. Political problems and racial problems made the development of the Polar Ground Alliance extremely bumpy. Moreover, the Dark World of Northern Europe was so chaotic every day that people were stunned. The Polar Ground Alliance did not have the opportunity to get out of it. Only Zhongzhou State. Within the territory of the most powerful country in the world, there were only their own people. Although other superpowers were stationed in Zhongzhou State, they didn't amount to much at all. When they were expanding, an extremely stable rear became the most unscrupulous reason for them to act. However, other superpowers didn't dare to attack with all their strength because of the restlessness in their backyards. Almost every superpower in the Dark World had felt this kind of grievance, including Samsara Palace. Behind this kind of grievance often meant concessions and compromises, which meant absolute benefits, power, wealth, or resources. In short, they were what the superpowers in the Dark World pursued. In the long run, as their compromises and concessions increased, Zhongzhou State would be powerful in all aspects to the point of suffocation. How could the giants in the Dark World be willing to accept this? To invade Zhongzhou State, at least the Wang family of Beihai must be stopped. The footsteps of Kunlun City must be stopped in East Asia. This was everyone's bottom line. So for many years, as long as there was a chance, the superpowers would always focus on East Asia. While the superpowers were enemies with each other, they didn't mind cooperating occasionally when facing Zhongzhou state. They appeased Gao Shan country, drew East Island to its side, flirted with some important figures in South Asia, and even directly invaded Zhongzhou state. All these were to limit the power of Zhongzhou state in the dark world. 20 years ago, the Heroes Club went east. 15 years ago, Night Spirit invaded. 10 years ago, the Jiang family of South America entered Zhongzhou state and quickly retreated. They took actions again and again, big and small, but every time they failed. As time went by, after Samsara and Zhongzhou state had a cooperative relationship, the superpowers in the dark world gradually quieted down. They all thought they had missed the best opportunity, but they didn't expect that Zhongzhou state would use a final battle to directly target East Island when it attracted all the attention in the dark world. East Island was in a precarious situation. Its economy and special warfare system could be said to be miserable now. But the superpowers in the dark world suddenly found that when East Island was miserable, Zhongzhou state also gave them a huge opportunity. It was an unprecedented opportunity, and also an unprecedented crisis. This was the situation that the superpowers didn't want to see the most, but it was also the opportunity they had been waiting for a long time. Similarly, this was also the reason why several people from various dark superpowers gathered in a shabby house at this time. With East Island as the border, we cooperate outside the border, and fight inside the border. How about that? Ben, who was wrapped in a black robe and looked like a skeleton, ignored the voices around him. He looked at the screen quietly, and after a long silence, he suddenly opened his mouth. He turned around. In the dark environment, his face was blurred, but his eyes were extremely bright, full of mysteriousness and treachery. We've been waiting for this day for a long time, haven't we? As the first vice president of the Heroes Club, Ben's strength was needless to say. He was definitely a figure who could be ranked among the superiors of the half-step invincible realm. But his fame didn't come from his strength, but from his insidiousness and cunningness. Ben's code name in the dark world was Ghost Fox, and he was good at deception, disguise, concealment, assassination, and escape. In the dark world, few legends about Ben were about his strength. He always appeared as the think tank of the Heroes Club and played the role of a schemer. This time, from the final battle of Zhongzhou State to the Battle of Changdao, the Heroes Club didn't send anyone to the scene, but it could be said that the Heroes Club was the first superpower to enter East Island. It was also he who made an appointment with these people here today. This might not prove anything, but it was enough to show that Ben's sense of smell and the general trend was extremely sharp. I agree with what Crow said. In the dark, a deep voice rang out. I reserve my opinion. I'm not as smart as you, and I can only see what's in front of me. The current situation is that East Island has already used this area as a battlefield. As for the cooperation outside the border, I don't care, but I'll report it to my superior. In the shadow, a burly bald man walked forward and said in a cold tone. So what do you mean, King Bear? Ben's tone didn't change at all, and he asked in a low voice. The order I received is to attack Samsara Palace and build a branch of the Polar Ground Alliance in East Island. King Bear's body moved agitatedly in the hall. In the shadow, he was like a grumpy monster. The attack on Zhongzhou State has nothing to do with the order I received, so, no, Mr. Bear King, I have to tell you that our cooperation doesn't conflict with the order you received. Ben smiled. King Bear of the Polar Ground Alliance could be said to be one of the most famous superiors of strength in the dark world. He had the Thunder Vein, and it had grown several times with the progress of martial arts. His power was so strong that it was comparable to that of the ordinary superiors of the invincible realm. But King Bear was a straightforward person. To put it bluntly, just like what he said, he wasn't very smart. So in the Polar Ground Alliance, although he had a high position and power, every time he took action, he would be followed by a top advisor. Today, King Bear came alone, but the advisor was nowhere to be seen, which was a bit strange. I can't guess what His Highness the Alliance leader is thinking, but I think, in any case, His Highness will not let go of the opportunity to weaken Zhongzhou State. attacking Samsara Palace, and even building the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance in East Island, are all intended to contain Zhongzhou State. Ben's skeleton-like skinny body floated slowly in the hall, and his tone became more and more relaxed. I know you and Crow have doubts about this battlefield, but in my opinion, this battlefield is the most suitable place for us to play. From my plan, what East Island has done is simply perfect. Perfect? Crow sneered in a hoarse voice. He was the leader of Fantasy World in East Island this time. Although his status was not as high as Ben's in the Heroes Club, it was not much different, so he spoke without scruples. Sorry, I don't see what's perfect about it. I only see the stupidity of East Island. I admit that this is their home field, and we came to Changdao to show our respect to them. But these stupid guys actually want to plan the battlefield? Who do they think they are? The Battle of Changdao is right in front of us. When and where it will happen, can East Island completely control it? Can you fly? Ben suddenly asked. What? Crow subconsciously froze for a second. Yes, I can fly. But how far can you fly? This is East Island's home field, and it's not difficult for East Island to roughly locate us. Why do you think they can't plan the battlefield for us? Ben's tone was cold. Didn't you watch the news? The spokesman of East Island military said it was a military anti-terrorism drill. Crow, don't you understand? Military anti-terrorism drill? Crow muttered to himself, and his face suddenly changed. When there was a military drill, there would naturally be an army. This was common sense that everyone knew. Maybe you should go outside and have a look. Ben squinted his eyes and said with a smile. Crow's face was gloomy. His figure flashed, and he already appeared by the window. They were now in an old city area that was about to be demolished, just in the suburbs. When East Island planned the battlefield, they directly included this area. According to the satellite map, this old city area was just on the edge of the battlefield. At this moment, in Crow's sight, a large number of ordnance had been transported here, and soldiers in East Island military uniforms were coming slowly from afar. Armored vehicles could be seen everywhere, and it looked like they had completely surrounded this place. Crow's face was gloomy and cold, and his whole body was filled with undisguised killing intent. 10 years ago, his throat was injured, and he was almost cut with a sword. And the initiator was the current number 1 superior of East Island, Tianhai Wuji, who was trapped in Zhongzhou State. Therefore, Crow didn't like East Islanders at all. Looking at the approaching army, his eyes gradually became crazy, with crazy killing intent. East Island dares to send troops to the conflict in the dark world? Crow's smile was cruel and gloomy. Are they crazy? They're just practicing, and they won't join the war blatantly. Ben shook his head. None of the superpowers that could become giants in the dark world were simple. Behind every superpower, there were more or less political factors. In Zhongzhou State, the Wang family of Beihai was the head of the Southeast Group. Kunlun City was the highest special warfare agency in Zhongzhou State. Sai City could also dominate Mount Taibai in the northeast. The Polar Ground Alliance was in Snow Country, and its involvement with the energy oligarchs and even the military and government of Snow Country would only be more complicated. Fantasy World was deeply rooted in North America, and it was also supported by a strong power. In this case, if they used the army to solve the conflict in the Dark World, it was tantamount to suicide for East Island, which was not strong in military power. Once such a thing became a fact, it would be a war, and there would be no room for negotiation. So it was basically impossible for these soldiers to join the war. But if they didn't join the war, they could block the battlefield. In the territory of East Island, if East Island wanted to fight, everyone could see it. No matter who it was, they had to obey the will of East Island. This was the home advantage of a country. Look, what a spectacular scene. Ben came to Crow and said with a smile, "It fits perfectly with my plan." "Everyone, I think we can talk about my plan now." The blockade plan." "Blockade?" Crow twitched the corner of his mouth. In the dim light in the hall, his expression was not obvious, but the mockery in his tone was obvious. Ben, is your plan to block us all? You can say that. Ben said blandly, at least on this battlefield, we can't get out, but neither can the people of Zhongzhou State. Crow and King Bear froze at the same time. The power of Zhongzhou State is too scattered, and they are too confident. East Island, Northern Europe, North America, and their own base camp, they are indeed powerful, but they can't be so extravagant. If the people of East Island trap the elites of Zhongzhou State here. If Knights Templars and Fantasy World start to fight back against the power of the Snowdance Corps in North America and Northern Europe, what will happen to Zhongzhou State? Ben asked with a smile. They will definitely support us. King Bear said without hesitation. This was a truth that everyone understood. As a newly established super elite legion in Zhongzhou State, the Snowdance Corps' internal lineup was completely stunning. According to the news they received, Zhongzhou State had 3 young heavenly sons, 2 invincible realm experts, a large number of young geniuses, and the backbone of the special service generation, including a super assassin like Tribulation. This force could almost be said to be the most reliable force of Zhongzhou State. Using them to deal with East Island showed how determined Zhongzhou State was this time. But no matter how determined Zhongzhou State was, it was impossible for Zhongzhou State to watch them fall into a desperate situation. Once the elites of Zhongzhou State were trapped in East Island, and Fantasy World and Knights Templars exchanged battlefields to attack Situ Canyue and Gu Qianchuan, Zhongzhou State would definitely support them without any hesitation. Oh, support. Ben nodded. But what if they have a reason not to support us? What do you mean? Crow's tone was cold, but his eyes gradually lit up. For example, here. Ben straightened his body and switched the screen. A map of Zhongzhou State appeared on the screen, with vast mountains and rivers and beautiful mountains and rivers. Ben pointed at the border and said indifferently, between the Snowdance Corps and the Border Praetorian Corps, which one is more important to Zhongzhou State? The Border Control Corps? Crow's and King Bear's faces changed at the same time. We are enemies of each other, yes. But enemies also pursue common interests. On the matter of Zhongzhou State, our position is the same. So, maybe we can really cooperate for once. Zhongzhou State and Samsara dare to disperse their forces, but don't we dare to disperse our forces? Crow's eyes were shining and hesitant. He seemed to be hesitating and afraid. This is the best chance, and maybe the last chance. After the fall of the Li family in Zhongzhou State, although Gu Xingyun became the war god of Zhongzhou State, he has been busy consolidating his position for many years. In the early stage, he had to face the suspicion of others in Zhongzhou State. In the middle stage, Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong killed Heavenly Spirit with one shot and stole too much of his limelight. After a few years of peace, Samsara appeared again. Kunlun City seemed to be prosperous, but in fact, it has not been comfortable these years. Otherwise, why would Gu Xingyun make so many deals with us? But this time is different. Gu Xingyun has almost consolidated his position. This time, Zhongzhou State conspires against East Island. Samsara is the leader, but Gu Xingyun is the promoter. Obviously, Gu Xingyun needs a huge victory to completely walk on the altar. If Zhongzhou State wins this time, Zhongzhou State will not only open a gap in East Island, but also let none of us have a good time in the future. Now we have such a good chance to give Zhongzhou State a fatal blow. I don't understand. Why are you hesitating? Ben took a deep breath, took out a cigarette and lit it. He said indifferently, as long as the 5 of us work together, no matter what Zhongzhou State does, it can't win. There was no doubt about that. No one would doubt this. Once they joined forces to invade Zhongzhou State again, Zhongzhou State was bound to be in a difficult situation. Support the Border Control Corps? The Snowdance Corps was about to give up. Support the Snowdance Corps? Once the Border Control Corps was forced, it was not just a matter of losing face because the National Gate was invaded. The Border Control Corps was the most elite combat corps of Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State could not afford to lose it either. Now the Snowdance Corps was acting in North America, Northern Europe, and East Island. Although they all had a tacit understanding with Zhongzhou State, as long as Zhongzhou State was strangled, those outside Zhongzhou State could not go back, and those inside Zhongzhou State could not come out. This was the real blockade. But, Wang Tianzong, Crow opened his mouth and spat out a name. The pressure that this name brought was just too great, causing Crow's tone to become sluggish and sluggish. The top expert on the divine list. The Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State held the first murderous weapon in the dark world, Human Emperor. This was not a name at all. It was a mountain that pressed on everyone's heart. Zhongzhou State conspired against East Island in the general trend. But all the superpowers conspired against Zhongzhou State in the general trend. But Wang Tianzong, how to deal with it? If Wang Tianzong takes action, someone will stop him. A peaceful voice suddenly sounded in the corner of the hall. Holy Light, the deputy commander of Knights Templars. Crow couldn't speak for a while. Thinking of the behemoth behind Knights Templars, which had a small territory but boundless faith, Crow seemed to understand something vaguely. We can't give up on East Island either. Holy Light said with firm and persistent eyes, we are still maintaining a cooperative relationship with East Island, and we have even paid a lot, of course. Ben said with a smile, we will all stay in East Island. As for who will go to Zhongzhou State, it's the business of His Highnesses behind us. Holy Light nodded. His white robe seemed out of place in the dark hall, filled with a kind of holy radiance. All the superpowers in the dark world were constantly fighting for interests. But Knights Templars had always been spreading faith in fierce means. The road ahead of Knights Templars was the Holy War. It would never end. Holy Light suddenly frowned and said thoughtfully, and, if this thing succeeds, I want a person. Okay. Crow said first, if this thing succeeds, you have contributed the most, and Fantasy World will have no problem with who you want. Our Jiang family has no problem with that. But we can give him to you except Li Tianlan. This guy is related to the destiny of our Jiang family for hundreds of years. If Knights Templars want him, then I have to say sorry. In the dark hall, there seemed to be a void passing through the eaves and spreading in the room. A vague illusory shadow walked into the room and said with a smile, sorry, I'm late. Evil? The crow subconsciously raised its voice. We have met. In the hall, the only invincible realm killer in the dark world seemed to chuckle. But I didn't know you well enough before. To show my sincerity, I would like to introduce myself again, Jiang Qianhua of the Jiang family of South America, codename Evil. Fantasy World. Heroes Club. Polar Ground Alliance. Knights Templars. Jiang family of South America. 5 families gathered. The living room was strangely quiet for a moment. Then Holy Light broke the silence again. Sorry. He said softly but firmly, what we want is also Li Tianlan. Oh. Jiang Qianhua said in a playful tone, is this an order from your chaotic highness? Holy Light narrowed his eyes slightly and looked straight at the illusory shadow in front of him. He said calmly, no. It's His Majesty's prophecy. Everyone's face changed. Evil's expression instantly became extremely ugly. His Majesty. In the dark world, this was a very special word. And there were only 2 people who deserved this word and could make them sincerely awe. One was the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, Wang Tianzong. In the misty darkness of the Wang family of Beihai, the Sword Emperor's sword was enough to make people feel desperate. And the other one? He was not in the dark world, nor was he an invincible realm expert. He controlled the most extreme and crazy dark power in the dark world, but he had been walking in the brightest light and moving forward in the praise of people. From the light to a brighter light, you're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.